Next level. Next level.
Thank you for joining us this.
Bless you.
Bless you. Bless you. Evening. This is the Aspen City Council work session for August 1st. We made it to August 2022. Tonight's agenda, we have Parks and Open Space Sales Tax Renewal discussion, Parks Special Use Policy and Fees, and a little time for a Living Lab discussion at the end of our meeting. With that, we'll go ahead and get started right away. Austin, if you want to introduce.
Perfect. Thank you, Mayor Tory and members of City Council. My name's Austin Weiss. I'm the Parks and Recreation Director. And with me tonight, I have Matt Kuhn, who is our Parks and Open Space Director. And I'd like to just take a quick moment to introduce some other folks that we have with us tonight. We've got members of our Parks and Open Space and Trails Board. We have Ann Mullins and Adam McCurdy with us tonight. I think that's it. And then we've got a number of park staff here as well. John Spees, Michael Tunte, Teresa Hackbarth, and Steve Barr, all members of the Parks and Open Space team here tonight. So We are thrilled to be here and to continue the conversation of the half-cent reauthorization efforts that we've been undertaking. And with that, really our goal tonight is to really start to finalize both our plans, and currently it's kind of penciled in that we're going to the voters this November, and we want to make sure that everyone is still comfortable with that strategy. And then we also want to start to focus in on actual ballot language and see if we can start to finalize what that ballot language might look like.
All right, well, I think this is the third time we've come to you all discussing this, and just as a little bit of a recap, it's always fun to look back over the last 20 years at what we've been able to accomplish with the half-cent sales tax and the funding that enabled for our department, and I think for the greater community in general. And really one of the biggest and I think most impactful projects that's happened has been the connection from Stein Park to Highway 82 and the Cemetery Lane corridor and this Cemetery Lane viaduct, as we call it. Trails used by hundreds of people daily, I'm sure, year-round, and it's plowed and maintained as a connection all year long. The half-cent also contributed to the ARC, and as we all know, the ARC has really become kind of a centerpiece for our community. Everything from ice hockey to competitive swim meets for the Western region, and I think just a wide variety of uses, big and small, and that's definitely been one of the big amenities.
And I'll just add here, obviously the ARC is kind of the crown jewel there, but the left picture there also illustrates the entire community campus and the connection between the school campus and the ARC and the whole trail network in the field. So that community campus is another really big piece of this.
The trees have gotten a lot bigger since our site visit last week. Also, one of the big marquee projects of the half-cent sales tax and the bonding that occurred was the clubhouse. And believe it or not, it's been around, what, 20 years, 21 years now? So quite the amenity. Again, trees have grown up quite a bit in this place as well. I should mention the golf clubhouse is not just a clubhouse, it's the Nordic Center in the winter, as well as kind of turned into a hub of the community for a locally serving restaurant. Yep. It's busy most nights there, so it's kind of a unique space. The Terrell Wade Bridge connecting Tyhack and the ARC is, in this picture, very young, but has become, again, another key backbone of the community, connecting a couple different parts of the valley with a multi-use trail in the summer and a primary ski corridor, not just for Nordic, but find a lot of people skiing off Tyhack and going over to the ARC or to Highlands via this bridge. Smuggler Mountain Open Space was a key partnership with Pitkin County and a great acquisition laying the groundwork for the entire hunter-smuggler open space complex, I'd say, with a variety of different parcels, some owned by the city, some jointly, some by the county and others. So that was funded through the half-cent. And finally, improvements to a variety of parks, not just John Denver Sanctuary and Rio Grande that's shown in these pictures, but parks such as Promontory Park out at Burlingame, improvements at Snyder Park. A huge variety of park improvements have occurred because of the half-cent sales tax and the funding that has brought in.
And obviously, this was kind of, Matt's review there was kind of a greatest hits, if you will, of parks and open space projects. But the impacts of the half-cent touch us every day with maintenance of these places and these facilities. And it really, what we want to, the story we want to tell tonight is how important the existence or the half-cent is for the ongoing maintenance of everything that we provide the community here. Want to touch briefly on the original half-cent ballot language and ballot initiative back in 2000. And let's go to the next slide. And we'll focus specifically in on the actual language here. For the purpose of buying, improving, and maintaining trail, recreational, and open space properties and ancillary facilities. And that's really enabled us to have a very broad reach with this fund. One of the things that we are looking at doing this time around, if you will, is not tying in any bonding authority with this vote, but really going back to the voters and asking for a reauthorization for a permanent half-cent tax. That's really our focus tonight.
As a bit of a recap of the Parks Fund, and maybe a precursor to the budget discussions coming up in a month or so, the half-cent contributes about 31% of our annual revenue. And as Austin pointed out, that's not just for capital projects, that's for our day-to-day operations, that's for our staff, and generally, our forecast for, this is out of last year's budget book, the 2022 budget book, but with $14 million in revenue coming in, 31% of that is tied to the half cent. And we've got a number of large capital projects on the horizon. As I mentioned from our site visit last work session, we've got the Maroon Creek Multi-Use Trail, which is slated for next year. We've got some potential land acquisitions. We're always looking out for land acquisitions, and we came to you, I think it was in May, in a joint partnership with Pitkin County for the more ranch open space on W/J Hill. And then we've got some other really big projects that are coming up that are likely going to require the funding that this half cent brings in, including things like the pedestrian mall, rec facilities. There's ongoing capital maintenance that the Parks Fund contributes to and will aim to contribute in the years ahead. We have the Lift 1 corridor, and what we're, it's Willoughby Park is the current park, and we're hoping to keep that name. But as the Lift 1 corridor becomes established, there's improvements within Willoughby Park that the Parks Fund will be contributing to. And as well as we know that Cozy Point Ranch has its share of upcoming capital projects for improvements to housing, the riding arena, and the boarding facility.
Matt, can you give a little bit more detail about Lift 1 Park and Corridor? What is the city's obligation over there?
So the ordinances spell out that the city contributed, Mike will remember, 4.1 million?
3.6.
3.6?
Yeah,
3.6 million for improvements within the right-of-way. Those improvements that are on the park parcel that are not explicitly tied to the development are our responsibility. So an example is the plaza, the upper plaza, and the staircase coming down to there. There's planters around there. There's changes to the grass. Some of those expenses will come out of the Parks Fund.
Which is a committed $4.36 million. And is that money already set aside in an escrow account?
So the money set aside is for, it's my understanding, for the improvements within the right-of-way. The park space is outside of the right-of-way. And so there are going to be some expenses that we are anticipating that are outside of the escrow funding.
Thank you.
And we have those in our capital budget, and we've received some estimates. It's around $3 million.
Thanks.
Just to be clear, when you mentioned Willoughby Park, is that the volleyball park that we all think of there? Okay,
Correct.
right below the historic lift towers.
Yeah, and so when all of this comes together, Delensick Park connects to Willoughby Park.
Okay.
And the ski corridor will be the corridor adjacent to the hotel.
And so some of that may be in anticipation of the care of the Dulcinic parcel as well?
Delensick parcel is a separate capital project.
Okay.
The Lift 1 and Willoughby Park improvements are forthcoming.
Okay. I guess what I was getting at more is that the second park, who I don't pronounce that very well, would be potentially through the reauthorization for any improvements there.
Correct.
The development of the Lindsay Gardens?
Yes.
Yeah, and that's actually, that project's underway right now.
Okay.
So,
Thank you. Thank you
You
for
bet.
that.
Great. Any more questions?
you know, it's interesting, back in 2000, one of the major carrots, if you will, of the initial half-cent campaign was Smuggler Open Space and Smuggler Mountain. And we, you know, that was a huge victory for us to really sterilize most of Smuggler Mountain, but there's still a donut hole up there of private land that that we still keep an eye on. So there's still a lot of potential open space acquisitions, and as you all can imagine, they're not getting cheaper these days.
I was just going to say that when we got to comments, but that and Smuggler Mountain were also the real key targets by most of the citizens groups who got involved to support the question. And the Smuggler Mountain lots ended up being totally unaffordable and were not able to be secured, unfortunately.
Yeah, thank you. Want to talk briefly, back in late May, early June, we hired Keith Frederick from Frederick Polling to come and do some polling in the community to really take the temperature of how the community might view the reauthorization on the half cent. And, you know, we've certainly been pleased with the community has forever supported open space and trails, and that's been, we just really cherish that support that we get. People love what we do, and that makes our jobs easier. What we saw in this particular polling effort was 86% really support the reauthorization of this tax, and not just a simple renewal for 25 years, but we specifically asked and took the temperature of a permanent tax for the half cent, and we got, again, 86% support for that. So that was good news. Here, we just threw this slide in because it's kind of fun to see some of the comments, but this was when people were asked what the benefits of this program bring to the community. There were a number of different comments, but I just wanted to read one of them that stood out to me. This person said, "Solitude, a venue for togetherness with family and friends, havens for living things, an escape from the pressures of modern life, a reassurance that such places will exist for those who follow." And then here, what we wanted to kind of illustrate was kind of how the different reasons rank in the community of why people wanted to support the tax. And as you can imagine, trails and open space rose to the top. But we also saw really strong support for both Wagner Park and Rio Grande Park in their uses as sporting ball fields and the community campus ball fields. And the community really recognized the value of those. We heard it's a vital part of Aspen. And certainly there was, I guess, a comfort level that this is not a new tax. It's it's a continuation of an existing tax.
Keeping it relatively short here, the question for council is, should we proceed with the November 2022 ballot question? And if the answer is yes to that, we're prepared to pull up the existing ballot language and have a discussion around any changes that you would like to see regarding the ballot language.
Any questions? Questions at this time?
It's not so much I have questions at this time, but do you want comments about the overall proposal now or after we discuss ballot language? That's where, I mean, I had a few items I'd hope to bring up as we're discussing it, but.
Give me 1 second for that, because I do have questions. My question on this, with the polling, was there any opportunity in the questions that were around the polling about what people would be looking to see from a renewal of the tax? So what you've shared with us is kind of support. And you did include the minority opinion of why nots. But did we have the opportunity through this polling to learn anything about what our community maybe expects, wants, or desires from a renewed tax?
For specific projects and facilities and that sort of thing?
Possibly. Like, were there any questions on the poll that said, like, you know, what would you like to see from your rec department or your parks and open space, I should say? But Did we use the poll in that direction at all?
No, we did not. At this point, we are going through a planning process with REC that does do some of that polling as well, or surveying, but no, this particular polling effort did not.
Thanks.
But I do want to add, I think the way the questions were crafted, you can infer what the community wants, and that's why I brought this slide back up, because we jumped ahead and we synthesized just the summary. But trails are where the community showed the strongest correlation to the half cent and their support of the half cent sales tax. So I do think that you can infer that those things that are the strongest levels of support are also what the community is looking for. We did not offer open-ended questions about what should we do in addition to the current uses of the sales tax. And I think that's something that we need to think about kind of holistically, because we utilize the half cent sales tax generally every year. And so adding more things or doing things in addition to what we current use would either require bonding or us to kind of revamp and relook at priorities and what else we do within the fund. So Ward's got his hand up.
Okay.
Is that just a little more context?
Question here?
Yeah, you mentioned the bonding. What is our bonding capacity at this point? The original language allowed for bonding, but how much of that bonding authority do we have left?
We don't have any opportunity remaining on the half cent.
Rachel?
Yeah, thank you so much. And please, no, I really am very supportive of this question going forward, without any question. And for me, to do or move forward with a simple renewal, asking people to renew existing language is the most straightforward and simplest and easiest to pass. You know, rather than a large bonding question, large dollars, or, you know, it's good to put projects in a sense, but there's always detractors from projects. And so there is the resolution of intent that would be written separate from the ballot language that council would pass as along with it when we put it on the ballot. And so that really could be very illustrative to the community of what the intents are beyond, you know, slipping in there. So I just want to mention those two things. My questions coming into this after reading the memo were to ask, and it can be information we get later, but how close are we to paid off on the bonds that were issued under the old half penny? And I'm not sure if that's the ARC or whether that was, you know, the totality of all the projects that were wrapped up at that time. But that would be nice, and I think good information for the public in terms of responsible having paid off the debt and things like that. We did have some real leading issues, even though they weren't in the ballot language at those times, and that was things like Smuggler and Shadow Mountain. And a great number of people, Fonda Patterson and Tom Cardamone and others, were involved. And a strange little fact is that I didn't start that campaign until October of that year. And we just came on strong and fast because I was working so hard on the Regional Transportation Authority, which was on the same ballot, to see if that would pass. So we really only came back to that campaign pretty close to, you know, when people are going to be voting and got the word out. But as you said, parks and open spaces is just dear to everyone's hearts here. The one thing that I would note in this is that this one isn't subject to the food tax refund that the general public receives each year, citizens of Aspen. But the first open space tax, which is going forward in perpetuity, does allow for that food tax refund in which the council sets. And so I had thought that it would probably be valuable to review when was the last time the council set that sales tax refund and take a look at it for the future, given the inflation that our public is experiencing at the grocery store and in rent and everywhere else. If there's a notice reflecting the potential of an increase of that sales tax, some small or reasonable amount might be a good move going forward for the renewal of this half penny. So I'd like to take a look at that. The other item I had thought about a little bit, I don't think this language limits it, but I'd like maybe you to reaffirm it, if we were to be purchasing an open space parcel that had water rights associated with it, would we be able to use the same funding source to also purchase the water rights, which is what you need to keep the land active and keep the land in good shape? And so I just wanted to make sure on that. I know when the county had renewed their open space tax one time before, they included water rights to make sure. And again, I don't want to change the language if necessary at all, but I think that that's an important component. And then the last two comments I have are, and I mentioned it during our site visit, that the ARC was once upon a time piped for an outdoor pool so that people could enjoy sitting by the sun in a small, mild, simple, non-wave pool, exciting outdoor pool. And that was eventually canceled by a prior council who just didn't have a consensus on what type of pool it should be. But I'd like to think that that could be on the potential list of improvements to the ARC that we see. And I'll just leave it at that. It's not something I'd like to put in the ballot language, but to me, that facility is very incomplete without that one summertime component. And it is piped for that already. It was designed to have that added in the future. The other comment is really relating a little bit to the equestrian center that we visited at Cozy Point. And what's exciting to me is that your work unfolds over time and over a number of years. And it's not as if this is going to pass and you're going to run out and start and do all those projects at once. But some are more pressing than others, clearly for safety and usage. But I really think that on the equestrian center, we should try to seek some greater, broader community buy-in, whether it's with the Roaring Fork Horse Council or, the greater community, because it's a lot of facility for the city only to run. And it's, as I can understand it, pretty much the only public facility that way in the valley. And it just, what it reminds me of is having the purchases of some of the open space parcels up in Hunter Creek. And the County Open Space Board started and did a private fundraising job, that went with that. And the same with actually the Drosty purchase that the city participated in, but there was a private fundraising capital drive as well that helped that. And I just think that as we go forward, and again, none of this has to be in the ballot language, I would like to proceed with fulfilling that facility's needs and the great community services that it offers. But it's at a time when we should also try, after this ballot question passes, and if we're able to facilitate and afford these types of programs, that we see greater regional community involvement in that regional facility.
Yeah, you bet. And I just wanted to make one brief comment about some of the targeted properties that we've had in the past that the original half-cent went after, or projects and that sort of thing. And really, we have found ourselves in a position now where we built all these fabulous facilities, and really what we need to make sure is that we
Keep 'em up.
ensure that we can maintain them and keep them in good order. So that's one of our primary goals with this
and
effort.
I agree with that entirely. But anyhow, those are my only real comments or questions about this going forward.
Thank you.
Thanks. Just to respond to the one that I know right off the top of my head is all the half-cent bonds end at the end of the half-cent. So everything will be paid off by 2025.
Fantastic. Thank you.
As we go into budget season, with this being a November ballot question, how are you going to prepare budget for us to be looking at?
The budget that historically we have shown you over the last several years, I believe, comes without the reauthorization at that point. So it doesn't assume.
It comes with the reauthorization, and it has, 2 years ago, I think we had it without the reauthorization, and this year with finance, I think it has the reauthorization out of 5 years.
Stand corrected.
Yeah.
It would be nice for the public to be able to see what it would be without the reauthorization, though, at some level, where we would have to plant a few less flowers on the mall, or
We'd need a couple work sessions to work through that, those kind of questions.
But remember, this tax doesn't expire until December 31st, 2025.
right.
So the budget next year is not affected.
Oh, I know, I'm just thinking of when we look at a 5-year,
Right,
Okay.
yeah, same.
Yeah. if you-
Okay, any other questions at this time? Okay, so let's go into the discussion about ballot language or ballot question if you want.
So what we posed here is, just, and this is just for discussion's sake here, but really, you can see here, we've taken the existing language from the original half cent and added for the permanent extension of the 2000 voter-approved half cent. This is for us to kind of hammer through and see what folks are comfortable with.
Well, I'll start. This inevitably gets the question about, well, what about 10 years from now? You know, you've got some long-range planning here. Yes, some facilities need constant maintenance and the like, but, you know, the question that we face on the street is really, well, then what? And the counter to this is people say, well, the city has so much money, and what are we going to be doing with it? Well, in the future, obviously, we're going to be wasting it. And how do you counter that? How do you talk to those points? And the reason I bring that up is because permanent extensions are around that kind of discussion. As you said, your polling did show that there are people that are just anti, period. So anyway, that's what I hear from people that talk to me is, well, what if this is permanent? What are you going to be doing when all the land is bought that you can buy, when all your facilities are maintained in a certain state that hopefully we're not looking at capital improvements that are in the tens of millions of dollars all the time? What happens?
And I'll just start off and allow Matt to weigh in as well. But getting back to this idea of maintenance, such a large percentage of the half cent in the future will be going to upkeep of facilities, whether it's an actual building or upkeep of some of these large acreages that we have as well.
Yeah, and the things that we will need to maintain are going to be increasingly expensive. And there's some examples. One is the Terrell Wade Bridge, which we looked at. That bridge, just like the Castle Creek Bridge, has a lifetime associated with it. The deck that's on it has a shorter lifetime than the actual structure of the bridge. And so when it comes time for us to take the concrete off of the deck and replace it with new concrete, that project will very likely exceed the available funding if we're solely relying on a 1 cent. Perhaps we would be able to look at bonds to maintain that, but some of those very large, big ticket items, I suspect, are going to really push what we could fund without a half cent.
I'll just add that as we continue to plan for large housing expansions and developments, you know, we do those with parks in mind as well, parks and trails to service those communities. So that's going to be an ongoing need as well.
And then another question that would be ancillary to that would be, so people pay for recreational programming and the like. Would any of the benefit of extending this half penny benefit the community in any of that? Does this help to keep recreational fees at certain levels? Potentially in the future, would it even possibly help to make sure that they're not rising fast or even go down in the future?
Yeah, absolutely. When we look at utilizing the half cent towards recreation facilities, that absolutely affects the bottom lines of programming fees and every aspect of the rec department. So it really, and that's true for golf as well. The parks is involved out there as well. So it absolutely keeps fees lower.
The synthetic turf at Island, that has a 12-year lifespan. We're on 10 years, I think, of that current synthetic field. And when we need to replace that, it's in the neighborhood of $750,000. The outfield fences that rec programming uses that are top-notch, all that stuff also has a lifetime and will need replacement. So yeah, a lot of that rec facilities, our teams take great pride in maintaining.
Two more quick points, if I may. One is that all of those future improvements will come before the council and before the public for review. So it's not just in perpetuity and it's spent. The other piece is that, you all know this, the vast majority of this tax is paid for by people who don't live here, and it benefits residents and part-time owners and visitors alike. Thank you.
Rachel,
I think I can,
it's okay. I'll come to you, and
thank you.
it's that way.
I'll be here.
Thank you. You know, this points out to me that, and it's more work for you guys, but creating some sort of useful life document over any number of your facilities, and if something is good for 25 years and has to be replaced again in 25 years, that's what we need to know, and that's the type of information whoever is working on a campaign will need to know. I think that's a really important point, because there are more facilities than anybody has in their mind. You know, you guys do, but, you know, people have their 1 or 2 favorite parks they use, or 3 or 4, and they forget about the other 20. And you might not be a golfer, so you don't think about the golf facility, or tennis, or pickleball, or any of these things. So I think a useful life would be good, and how many years they're good for. You know, the Healthy Rivers and Stream Fund was put into place countywide in perpetuity. It was not something that went away because people realized the water issues would be with us forever, and that is something just to bear in mind. The Healthy Community Fund in the county did polling before its last renewal, and there was a kind of sentiment that prevailed, I think, to say only do it for 8 years, because we don't know, maybe all the social problems will go away in 8 years. And we still went ahead and put it on the ballot for 10 or something longer than that, even though but you're really asking the citizen groups to do an awful lot of work for you if it's every 5 years or every 6 years, which is what that one used to be like. So if there's really enough resistance to this, I could see moving it back to asking for like a 30-year renewal or something long enough to really plan on and everything. But I'm not sure people will see the difference between that 30-year and perpetuity anyhow. And I guess the final comment is that should the public at some point feel that that is an overfunded and wasteful program, any money that's not bonded can be changed to another use or eliminated by a future election. So if people aren't satisfied by what is all happening, I think there's that. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Rachel.
I just wanted to pick up on Tori's line of questioning, and I take as valid everything you just said, and I have no expectation that in some period of time our needs to maintain and operate are going to stop. That said, forever is a really long time, right? I mean, the Earth isn't going to be around forever. And so I'm just curious, at a staff level, how much consideration was given to, should it be, say, another 25 years or some other significant period, as opposed to forever, and just kind of background of that conversation?
Yeah, we did consider elimination as well as increasing the sales tax. And we ran the numbers for a 0.6% as well as a 0.75%. And really where we landed is that the 0.5% is the most consistent with where we've been for the last 20 years, and it keeps us going. It's a percentage, so that number is variable on the economy, it's variable on inflation. And I think that allows us to continue our current standard of operation. And the reality is, if we do take that away, the way that parks and open space function, whether it be in our support of acquisitions to Pickens County, or whether it be in the level of service that we provide the community, those things would decrease. There would inherently be a decrease. We didn't analyze what would we cut first. Our hope would not to get to that scenario.
Sure.
But that's what in reality, to take it and analyze what could you do without that money would be an exercise in reduction of our current scope of work.
Right. The question was just if, rather than a permanent extension of the 0.5, did we look at a 25-year extension of the 0.5?
Generally, we don't forecast out our capital budget beyond 10 years.
Okay.
And so taking a capital budget to 25 years and then contemplating what we wouldn't do either from capital or from an operations standpoint in 25 years out was just a little too far. Does that answer your question?
I think Skippy was asking, did you ask people about a 25-year extension versus in perpetuity? And did it score higher or
No, I
smaller?
wasn't asking about the polling. I was just asking about staff's thoughts around permanent versus, some more limited period. I was just following up on kind of Tori's line of questioning there.
Yeah, and we certainly, we looked and considered many different scenarios at the staff level, including bringing in the Open Space and Trails Board with a similar question about duration and term of this. And it really, as Matt indicated, the needs are going to be there for us to continue to utilize or provide the services to the community. And Rachel, to your point, we certainly talked at length about the effort it takes to go back through a renewal cycle again. And we felt like if there was community support at this point to make it permanent, that would be the ideal goal here.
Okay.
So.
Cool.
John, any comments at this time?
No, just that I see the value in the 0.5% open space tax. I'd like to continue to see it continue.
Can you go back to your funding pie graph on your slides about the dollar amounts that we're talking about? Half penny sales tax, is that the full 14?
No, it'd be 31% of that. Let me
Thank
see
you.
if I have my
Thanks.
calculator handy.
In this pie chart, the green is the half cent, and the blue is the original 1 cent permanent
Thanks.
open space tax.
It is worth noting that the 1 cent that this is all built upon is permanent. It's
Yes.
been in place permanently. And you might have to help me on the history on this, Austin, but it seems that, because I remember Al Bloomquist being upset that we were funding the personnel from the Parks Department and not the general fund. And he always thought that that open space fund should only be for acquisition and trails. But is staff paid out of the 1 penny essentially? Or the combined funds, and it no longer draws off the general fund. I mean, there was a period
correct.
when it used to,
Yeah.
and that just diminished any ability for hiring officers, salary raises across the whole general, and the infrastructure, which we do out of the general fund.
Yeah.
So that's an important consideration about how all the pieces of our budget work together.
Yeah, and just another layer of detail on that 1 cent, because it's a little bit more stringent, a little tighter usage of the 1 cent. As an example, the 1 cent couldn't be used for the recreational facilities that the half cent can be used for. And that, I guess, in many ways highlights the importance of that half cent for us to continue to collaborate and provide those facilities.
I think you just made the most important point of the discussion here, Austin. You're saying if the half penny went away, the 1 penny would not be allowed in usage to repair the arc or repair the golf course or repair the bridge or other things that are facility oriented. So the tennis courts or the pickleball court and those sort of things would have to then be funded from the general fund and then competing with failed stormwater drainage pipes
Right.
or police salaries. Thank you.
Thanks, Rachel. All right, so for council and Ward, I saw your thumbs up on the initial question there. I guess on this one piece, what we're talking about is the ballot language for the permanent renewal, or is there a timeline? Is there, does council feel more comfortable? What I'm hearing is we are listening to the polling that you've done. It looks favorable for a permanent extension. While we have consideration up here, you've had a couple questions fired back at you. And as Rachel prefaced her remarks by saying, look, number one, I'm supportive, don't get me wrong, but part of our job is to kind of hammer you a little bit so that other people don't do it at a later time. With that, I mean, right now, I'm hearing support for moving forward with what you have presented to us.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. And Maine, one more thumbs up from Maine.
down your lobster.
The community support is expressed in the polling and the value of the parks and open space to the well-being and mental health of our community. For me, it makes it a 2 thumbs up.
Thanks, Ward. Okay.
Great, thank you so much.
The fundamental question, just so I want to understand, is that you're supportive of a resolution that will bring back to council either next Monday or next Tuesday or 2 weeks from then, a resolution extending, and I do refer to it as an extension as opposed to a reauthorization, but simply an extension of the half-cent in perpetuity. Is it some other amendments to the language that you guys are requesting? So it'll be a simple resolution to put on the ballot.
As
that
simple
is
as-
extension.
As Rachel said, I think as simple as possible is best.
Well, again, there's two different things. One is the ballot language, which is simple, but in terms of the intent and need and potential usage and the whys, aren't those things kind of in the resolution?
Well, we can have.
As a reference.
Yeah, you can have whatever, and I would suggest whatever whereas clauses you wish to set out in the resolution is appropriate. If you wish to do that there, you can do that at a separate resolution in which you endorse the ballot language. You can't. You can act individually in support of an issue. You cannot act as a board. Staff can't work in support. But what you can do is adopt a resolution endorsing the proposal, and that's often done when the ballots come out and
Right.
stuff.
You know, I'm trying to think, Jim, it seems that you've given us opinions on a couple other items that, the ballot language is very clear with X, and yet there's a resolution the council passed that expressed the intent of its uses, and that is also somewhat controlling when they're passed at the same time to put it on the ballot, as opposed to an endorsement of why we'd like people to vote yes. So all I'm saying is, rather than see that come back really quickly, I'd like to make sure the time is spent to make sure it's a good statement of our whys, of all of our whys and the need, and as clearly as we can do that in that time frame.
And that's fine. Again, the ballot has to be set by the county. I believe the deadline is September 8th. You have a meeting on August 23rd in which you could pass a resolution setting the ballot language and that's presented to the clerk. And the ballot language itself will be simple, and that's what I'm really
That's what counts.
focusing on. Yeah.
Thank you.
We'll get you something on I guess the plan will be the 23rd then.
Okay.
Thank you.
And I'd be remiss if I didn't point out that on your list of several large projects that have been identified, that indoor tennis courts are not there, but that does not preclude them from future conversations.
That's correct.
Neither is the outdoor pool.
That's why we want to keep
you.
recreation in there.
Yeah, I appreciate you.
Zip line?
Well, thank you so much. Appreciate your input.
Okay.
Into the seats.
So that was our tax and ballot language discussion. Following now is going to be some policy conversation around park uses and special event usage. And Rachel will be back with us in just one moment.
It's really filled out with all that lobster.
It's a healthy buttery glow. I did bring you guys a shared snacks there.
Thank you. That's the taller one, that's you. Is it uncomfortable to have your eyebrows above your head?
While we've got just a moment with no serious business going on, speaking of parks usage, For anybody that is watching, wondering, or listening, there is an amazing use of Wagner Park going on these next 3 days. I highly recommend that you make time in your busy day for what seems to be about a 25-minute performance in Wagner Park. It happens 3 times a day for the next 3 days. And talk about just a little refreshment for the soul. It is really great.
Is it the ballet thing? Yeah, it's going to be cool. I'm looking forward to that.
Yeah. And we can go ahead and introduce this and start our conversation, and Rachel will be back in just a moment.
Okay. Thank you, Mary Tory. Matt Kuhn, I'm the Parks and Open Space Director.
Nice to meet you again.
Just watching them bring the umbrellas down outside, yeah. Okay.
With me here is Steve Barr, our Operations Manager, Nancy Leslie, the Special Events Director. And we're representing a broader team of folks from Parks, Open Space, Special Events, and Recreation. And we're here today to kind of kick off probably several discussions around special uses and special events. And we're here because, as Tori mentioned just a moment ago about the ballet occurring in Wagner Park, we're seeing a variety of changing requests. We're seeing more frequent requests for uses in our parks. And they're different. They're just a little bit separate from what we currently have in the municipal code. And we're really coming to you to get some direction, have a quick check-in and make sure we're heading in the right direction as we embark on this. And so our goal tonight is to spend some time with you, and we're aiming to seek some clarity and provide this improved public-facing structure around special uses and special events. Tonight, we're going to really check in on 3 key policy questions that are going to guide us moving forward. One is around this overarching philosophy. The second is about this concept of a park framework or a park matrix. And the third is to discuss at a very high level commercial use and how we're going to kind of study and engage the community in that conversation. I want to just outline where we're going today because this is somewhat complex, and we're going to try to break it down into a few key discussion points and facilitate the discussion as best we can within the framework of our time. We're going to first establish some definitions so we're all kind of talking about the same things. We've got some example photos of various events that we've been seeing lately. Those 3 guiding questions that we're looking to chat with you about, we'll follow that, and then we'll close with some next steps. So our current policy, and I should quick pause here because there are special event permits, and then there's special events, which I look at Nancy, and Nancy oversees all kinds of community events. You want to touch on what those are?
So, one of the things that we talked about this afternoon, that it is, everybody throws around the term special event.
Bless you.
Right? Yeah, bless you. Everything is a special event. And, for really kind of the purposes of us to be able to define and to be really completely transparent and be very, very engaged in what we're doing and how we're doing it, that we need to, as Matt said, we need to really define a special event. So there are the events we do for the community. There's the July 4th, there's the New Year's Eve, there's the things that we as the city do for the community. There are what we kind of call our established or our grandfathered in events. There's food and wine, there's snow polo, there's a 1,000 other things that we're all used to. There's Motherlode, there's rugby, there's just, there's the AVSC barbecue on July 4th. There's all these, there's the buddy race, there's all these things that we permit, but we each have kind of, that we understand is part of kind of the fabric of the community. That's not what we're talking about. So what we're talking about really is almost a process which we don't have, in which we're using that maybe needs some help and some upgrading and some definition. Does that?
Yeah, and that's perfect. And the differentiator is there's special events, and what we're going to be talking about mostly are special event permits.
Use permits.
Use permits.
Yes.
So the definitions are really kind of something that we as staff have really aimed to clarify for ourselves, because we want to make sure we're really talking to each other in the same vernacular.
I'm sure everybody got all that.
So in our code, thankfully, we have a special event defined, and I think I saw all of you reading this. What I want to point out is that there's 3 sub-criteria to a special event, which really characterize and define it beyond what is in that first definition. One is that it would be something that has an expenditure-related connection to the city. Second, it would be that it would potentially require a land use code approval or a temporary land use approval. And the third is that it would be expected to have a visual, noise, or other environmental impact. This is not very exhaustive if you think about the modern special event that we see here. There's a lot more impacts potential to a special event. And so specifically for parks, as we are receiving requests for various uses, there's a couple things that stand out to us within the code that leave a lot of gray area. And it's really what I've highlighted in yellow, which is that a special event is either for-profit or non-profit. And there's a lot of things that happen that are neither of those. And that's where we started asking questions. So we also have a definition within the municipal code that's around park use. And we also refer to this sometimes as park rentals. These are smaller events or smaller uses within park spaces. They might be a small wedding. They might be a class reunion for Aspen High School. They could be yoga or birthday parties or various day camps. There's a variety of things that come to our table asking for usage in the park.
Hold on 1 second. Okay. Not all those other things you listed. These are actual requests that you get, that you look at each other and go, I don't know how this works.
Well, I wouldn't say we say, I don't know how this works. And that's an important thing that I wanted to put out, is we have a general policy within the city about how we approach or how we handle requests. And it's based on many, many years of requests and usage. And we're going to get into that in more detail. Is there a specific question you've got before I move on? Because I think we might answer your questions.
I'm looking at this list, and everything that's on this list doesn't say full park usage. To me, all of these could be accomplished in partial park usage.
That's exactly right.
Okay. That's what I was wondering. That's kind of
within the fee code, and I'll touch on this very briefly, but there is an exclusive use of the park called out.
Right.
But there's no definition of what exclusive usage actually is. Does that mean you're putting a fence around and you're not letting anyone in? Is that your event is so large that the public can't enjoy the space? And so we don't have a definition for exclusive use. Therefore, we kind of try to prevent that. We try to minimize the impacts as staff to a public space. Good question.
Thank you.
So as we were speaking, special events, the larger size event, these are the classic ones that we know of. Aspen Food and Wine Classic. The one in the top right is the finish to the Grand Traverse. That's a small special event. And then we've got the classic Rugger Fest that brings in a ton of spectators and people from around the country. And as I mentioned at the start, we're seeing trends around changes in use. We're seeing more requests for weddings and large-scale events with a lot of infrastructure. We're receiving new and increased uses, requests around personal trainers. One-on-one, 1-to-2 training at Island Field is something we see regularly. there's been a number of requests post-pandemic about formalizing our practices of allowing yoga or other fitness activities in parks. And then we're also seeing, over the last 3 to 4 years, an increase in businesses that cater picnics. And so a citizen can pay money, and a person brings tables, chairs, and blankets to a specific park with food, and kind of reserves that space for someone to enjoy a catered picnic.
I'm just curious if you guys have a read on this or not. There's a number of reasons why these types of new uses could be becoming more common, but, you know, amongst them are the displacement of, you know, community serving commercial uses from the commercial space, right? I mean, a yoga studio was a challenging proposition at a $10K a month rent, and when that's tripled, you know, where else do you go? Personal trainers, you know, we all had the Aspen Club, and JR's upstairs, and they're all vanishing, right? And even picnics, right? Like, you used to be able to maybe afford to go to a restaurant with some people, and now that's the option. So when people make these requests, do you hear about the why of the increase? Is that related to it? Is it not? I'm just curious.
We do, and it's all of those things that you bring up. And that's why we're here tonight, right? Is to have this discussion and to start this discussion, because it's really important. And we need to understand if there's direction for us to utilize public spaces for solely commercial purposes or semi-commercial purposes. And we'll get into that in a little more detail. But yeah, that's definitely why we're here.
Okay.
Did I miss anything?
No, it's just highlighting there are a number of businesses that are active solely because they're able to use our public spaces.
Yeah.
That's why they exist. So I think it's interesting to find out your take on how you feel about that.
Yeah.
Just a few more photos illustrating, you know, what we see and what we as park staff manage related to logistics. Tents that go up in big or small parks require us to go out and locate irrigation heads, be present during their install or load in and load out. Events utilize our existing infrastructure and make it their own. We've had, you know, relatively full-scale kitchens brought into parks to support an event or a use, and we do our own uses in the parks. This is a photo from Arbor Day, and so what we decide with your help is going to affect us as well, and so we want to take that into consideration.
All those were properly permitted?
I believe so.
Great.
I don't know about the Pepke gazebo.
Arbor Day was a total mess. Just kidding.
All right.
Maybe not the gazebo.
Tough to say. We don't know. All right, so we're diving into the first three questions. So the number one question, and as we all kind of connected, I think I mentioned at the start that there's been a group of recreation parks and special event staff going through this, and we've had some semi-weekly meetings for about 6 months just to kind of tee up the conversation. We really decided we needed to have a guiding philosophy that we could go back to, and when we're asked questions on whether or not these locally serving businesses should be in the park, or whether or not this corporate event should occur in the park, that we have a philosophy that we can come back to. And so we landed on a statement fairly simply that says the City of Aspen parks are natural environments that are first and foremost available for the community to enjoy. Why did we come up with this? Well, we as staff really feel strongly and find ourselves to be stewards of the parks so that they are open for anyone to go at any time and enjoy the atmosphere, the natural environment. As I mentioned, we find that a philosophy would be helpful for us to come back and answer questions in the future. We also think that philosophy guides us in helping answer cumulative and neighborly impacts that special uses and special events have, not just within the park space, but around it, and can also help us guide questions around maintenance and those type of things. This is that first part of the sentence that I just read. And there's a second part that's in the memo, and I just broke it down into 4 bullet points for simplicity here. And that is the City of Aspen supports requests. So this would be that we're supporting uses within the parks that maintain community access. This is about the exclusive use and not taking up too much of park spaces. That we support nonprofit groups. That special uses in parks provide educational or cultural benefit, and that they bolster community vitality. These are fairly broad, but we want to get some discussion around, are we heading in the right direction with these as tenants? It's up to Mayor Tory if you want to open up questions and discussion now, or if you'd like me to go through the remainder of the presentation and we come back to these points.
I feel like there's a question or two that's appropriate for now.
Let's do it.
That's the vibe I'm getting. Rachel?
Lucky I sit on this side. Back to the larger philosophy, not the 4 goals. I kind of feel, to sustainably enjoy, the word sustainable in there, that I'm not seeing or hearing that there's a lot of folks leaving trash behind for bears or just stuffing the canisters and not hauling it out with the picnic company or anything. But I do worry when we have tents that kill grass for a period of time or the overuse issues that other communities have come to face. I mean, in Summit County, Frisco area, they've had to take a real hard look at the lake and is it overused so that nobody really enjoys it anymore, and how many days can you get onto the trail safely or things like this. So at some level, I think there needs to be some sustainability in that philosophy statement. Thank you.
Anything?
Thanks for bringing that up. I appreciate that.
Yeah, I agree.
No events that let loose 1,000 balloons.
I'm not exactly sure how this fits in, whether it's part of this statement or it's one of the bullets, but there's nothing there that I disagree with. And this is something that I think is going to require a lot more thought and time, because we're responding to some very fluid, dynamic changes to our community in so many ways. And how do we, alter or amend or not the use of, these really, really precious public spaces to support that. So it just strikes me that while this is all right, there's sort of this envelope of, making sure that the mind, body, spirit ethos of Aspen is available to everyone, right, to all of our residents. And this is getting at that. But, there's just a lot of forces at play that are inhibiting or precluding or making it more difficult for many members or people in our community to access that full Aspen experience, and the parks are a way to support that.
I have a question for you at this time. What's the difference between a group of 20 friends meeting at a park and hanging out versus needing a permit to do that?
Right.
Can you hold that question? Because we have a slide for that. Tori.
You have to hand it to me, then I'll hold it.
Thank you.
The biggest thing I recall from unpermitted park use is when people go down and say, but we're getting married here and the lawnmowers are going. And they didn't have a permit, and it's like, can't you come back and cut the grass later? It's like, that sort of thing happens. Okay.
I think I have something to point out, and it really hit home after COVID or during COVID, when we kind of have this sense in there about community being able to access and use our facilities. Nothing made me more proud than during COVID, when each of our parks was full and there was vitality and people were out using them. It really made myself, and I believe our staff, feel like we were doing something amazing for the community. And I think it has continued on even in this kind of mid-level COVID environment. And I would love to see that availability to continue. And we want to be accommodating to everybody, that it makes sense. And it's just being able to create that space for the community, one, and then two, to create some kind of a foundation or a guiding principle that can allow us to assist all the other folks in the community or nonprofits and the other groups that we've kind of stated. So that's kind of where I started this.
Yeah.
Appreciate that, and totally agree. I mean, just for me personally, if it wasn't for our, trail system in parks during COVID, I mean, my studio is the size of this thing, and I would have totally lost it. Would have been bad for you and everyone else, but it was amazing, and so many people too. It really was the rescue and the refuge and the place for mental health and connection, and yeah, so just thank you.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Okay, I heard sustainability and general support. So we can revisit this, but I'd like to keep moving on to the next question, if that's okay. All right, so the second question revolves around type, frequency, and size. And this is where it gets a little complicated, and they're all kind of interrelated. And I think the memo started with size. That's not going to be our start today, just for explanation. But we're seeking council support to proceed with these 3 points, these 3 variables. And we're going to, if given the support, develop a matrix based on our knowledge, based on our experience in these parks that relates to each park. But there are some nuances here. So let's start with types of event. The current policy defines for-profit, non-for-profit as our 2 types. And we know that's not really what works, right? There's many more. Some variables that impact are how much infrastructure is coming in. There's different types of events that have huge tents. There's different types of events that have no infrastructure. Duration, how frequently or how long is the use happening on the park? Sometimes it's 1 day, sometimes it's multiple days, as well as impact. There's light and heavy impact. So our proposed use types, and this now goes back to, I just want to emphasize the term permit here. We're proposing 2 permit types. One would be a park use permit, which is building on the existing municipal code section under park use. And this would be non-commercial, non-exclusive, and low-impact activities or uses in the park. And then there's the large special events, which are going to be relatively consistent with the current municipal code. And then to Tori's point, we really value and place a lot of emphasis on the community gatherings of 20 people. And so our proposal is that informal, less than 25 participants is not a permit. You don't need to come to us and ask for that. But what that means is you also may not get first dibs on the picnic table at Heron Park. And so if you want to bring in 40 people and set up a pop-up tent over a picnic table, that's going to be in the park use category. If you want to bring in a caterer and have a large wedding in a park, that's likely in the special event permit category. So we're proposing 3 different types of types. Related to, good. Forgot where I was going here. So in each of these cases, for type, size, and frequency, we're using Coke Park as an example, just for continuity. And so in Coke Park, an example of a special event permit would be the Motherlode, the Golden Leaf, or the AVSC picnic. A park use permit would be a company picnic after work with 50 or 80 coworkers, or a 3 times a week summer kids camp that goes to Coke Park. We do have a bit of an open question here, which is where shall weddings or complex private events land in this type? And that's where it leads us into size.
Just to clarify, so seeing kids camp in the park use, kids camp is a paid thing. So as long as it's under that 25, it doesn't matter if it is or isn't paid?
Not necessarily.
Okay.
And so that's where frequency ties in. If we really view the community gathering as informal, maybe it should say in there infrequent or non-regular.
Okay.
when things become regular, when you're asking to use a park 3 days a week, we're automatically considering that as a special, as needing a permit. Partly because we need to manage how much activity is happening in those parks. We need to make sure there's not competing interests or multiple camps going into the same space. And that's where the cumulative neighborly impacts happen.
So large and/or regularized in the special events, is that?
Yeah.
Okay. And sorry, can you go back again? And then, so the non-exclusive bit I get, can somebody come in for a community gathering that's informal, less than, but make it exclusive, you know, put their fence up, you know? Like, where does that intersection point?
We have 4 rangers on our staff. If someone came and put up a fence around a park, I'm pretty sure that's something we would need to have a chat about.
Okay. So that's not intended as allowable?
Yeah, no, community gatherings is you and 10 friends getting together and having a picnic down on the bench on Rio Grande Park. We want to make sure that it's having a birthday party for your son and 20 people at Triangle Park. You know, we just kind of are trying to make a definition for something that doesn't require a permit.
Mm-hmm. And if you have a birthday party, you know, informal, no fee, but, you know, over 4 hours, 50 people show up, you need a permit for that.
Probably, and that's an example where we see folks bringing in bouncy houses into the parks and driving in stakes to hold the bouncy houses down, or, you know, a food cart coming in and
Not talking about all that, but.
Yeah, but it
But it does
snowballs.
happen.
Yeah, it definitely snowballs.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, John, and then Rachel.
Quick question. Aspen Ice Garden is a city-owned property. Does the Aspen Intersect Art Show?
Yes.
That's a special event. They have a permit.
And pay.
Yeah, in years past, I live across the street from that, and I enjoy the art. Don't enjoy the semis delivering it. Don't enjoy losing all the parking for 5 days. But they used to alleviate that with some free tickets. I went yesterday and was told it was $25 to get in. I didn't ask for free tickets ahead of time, so maybe they're available, but I was disappointed.
His comment, would there be, to keep in consideration public access for some of those exclusive rentals?
Bingo.
Especially the impacted neighborhoods.
Perhaps, not just for Councilman Doyle, that wasn't his
No,
suggestion.
not at all.
I did not hear that.
You know, and I will tell you that when it comes to Intersect Aspen, which is over there right now, I've had, they just went under new leadership in the last 2 years. And that's one of the discussions that I had with them, is I was like, hey, public access, so they are aware of that as a community benefit. They do honor that, but it's not formalized.
Okay.
So,
The food truck was tasty.
Nah. Normally we eat in the truck, not the truck, but it's very daring of you.
I mean, the food.
Rachel?
Yeah, this really brings up a lot of things for me, and I'm sure a number of them you've already been thinking about or something. But, so they may not be in great sequence here. But I think that as any part of a special permit review, there should be an impact assessment, you know, very, very clearly put down, you know, so that you can measure the event afterwards. Did they follow what they said would be the impacts, or was there more impacts? And that impact could be parking in the neighborhood, it could be trash cleanup, it could be, you know, any number of noise, you know, things like this. So I think that needs to be really important and out there. I think this is a different discussion, but I want to have it at some point. Maybe it's not today. Are permit fees break even, lose money, or a profit center? And should they be one of those three, always? You know, and that may particularly apply to commercial events. But I think we need to have that discussion about that, and what type of staff time goes into watching someone put up a large Butler rent tent and taking it back down, and what sort of deposit is required, particularly to protect our irrigation systems and things like that. We've all seen examples where a line was popped when someone just didn't take a look before they put up their post. So that's important to me. I think that what we're talking about here, and is so important that you're working on, is to make sure all the guidelines are clear, transparent, and equally applied. And no one can say, well, they got a permit, but I didn't get a permit, you know, and the whys. And I think that those are the goals of the outcome on this. It really does come up to raising a few questions for me about particularly the not impacting or eliminating others' uses. You know, I don't want to think, you know, you have the kids' party, but at the same time someone has really loud amplified music, and at the same time 3 different parties are trying to happen at once. So that leads to this idea of, and I know, Tori, you've mentioned this before in past years, where there's not a single park that's open for the public to use because there's a special event in every park. And how do we make sure that it's calendared or something in such a way so that people don't go, I'll take the kids to Heron Park. Oh, no, there's a big party. Oh, let's go over to here. Oh, there's a big party. You know, and how do we make sure there's always availability and things like that? And that comes back to helping track overuse in any given park. You know, I wouldn't want to see Heron Park booked 90 days out of the year, you know, out of the summer season or something like that. And we have to think about when it's really available to other people. The other thing, you know, was kind of surprised in reading the memo about this magnitude of infrastructure that is coming in. I guess I envision people using a city park for things because they can't afford to rent St. Mary's, or they can't afford to do the Elks or something like that. But at a point in which we're spending thousands and thousands of dollars to bring in chairs and seats and tables and silverware and a cooking kitchen on site, that is not the type of, quote, local wedding, or we're trying to stay on a budget because we can't afford it wedding. And that's totally just a commercial event that they're trying to avoid the $20,000 rental fee at the Jerome or whatever. I don't care, but we're going to be seeing drinking in our park. You're going to be seeing all sorts of things, and that is just way beyond what a simple service, a potluck, you know, this is great. We got some tables set up and some candles. But once you start saying, hey, we're opening our parks as commercial rental venues for weddings to avoid paying high fees in commercial properties, I'm not there. And I think that you know, I'm willing to listen to some conversations. I mean, I could immediately see, what about local caterers? Is this going to hurt local caterers who are doing those picnic baskets or something? But at the same time, what is the purpose of our parks? We saw 1,000 comments of people about solitude and open space and relaxing in nature, and that's not the same case if you're dancing to Mac the Knife again, you know, at 3 o'clock in the afternoon with all the kids, you know, there. So it brings up questions that are worth further consideration. Should we create one area that is a wedding park that people can book, that they can use, that has some concrete padding on it somewhere where they can put in the kitchen that comes in or whatever? I'm not saying we should, but I would rather have it all contained into one spot that's really equipped for it and it is easy to clean up and is easy to deal with than to have a constant competition over the best views in our parks and eliminating those for public use on prime days like Saturdays. You know, that just really bothers me. It does bring up again that idea, and I have noted this compared to other parks I've gone to. We don't really have barbecue pits out there for anybody to use, to come and barbecue and have people around a barbecue, and that's very common in almost every other park I've been to around the country. And you know, we have great parks here, no ifs, ands, or buts. But I was just up in Rangeley and saw they have some really beautiful parks and play fields and things like that for their people. I mean, we're not exclusive in that area. So I do want to think of what we need to manage in this. And those things tend to be things like amplified music. We don't, it's just, I don't want to hear someone else's music if I'm down in their park. Dogs. And you're trying to have a picnic and other people want to let their dogs run. How do you end those conflicts? And I don't want to have fighting break out in our parks. And the people get there. I was here first, in the casual group, and no, you were here first. And, and like you said, fighting over the one picnic table. So I want to think about how also you might put the right uses in the right places as part of this. And as I've said before, I think we're a little thin on dog parks anymore in this town. So that's something to maybe look for in the ballot issue. Again, I want to have a little more of that discussion about how much are we subsidizing commercial events with taxpayer dollars for these larger infrastructure events, and is there or should there be any space for them at all, and complex events like that? Thank you.
Thanks.
Yeah, I just want to quickly emphasize that I agree with what Rachel said. I think most of the smaller group uses are going to be locals for the most part, and the larger events are going to be corporate or probably somebody from out of town who, and sometimes they have events in parks, not because it's a money saver, but just because it's a nice place to have an event.
Yeah.
I see no reason for us to have to pay to maintain this. I think we should at least be at break even in the permitting process. If not, at least break even. Let's just leave it at that.
Ward.
Yeah, thank you. I think what I'm going to do is just kind of give you some bullet points of what I feel about the use of parks. I don't want to over-regulate our parks, and I want to prioritize public use and discourage exclusivity and encourage equity. I'm opposed to privatization of public places. We just had a discussion about a half-cent sales tax to support our parks and open spaces. I don't think that should go to subsidize commercial operations. There are events that have some pluses to them, like snow polo. Pardon me. Snow polo in the wintertime benefits a number of nonprofits, and at least the old Ice Garden Art Show was a big contributor to local nonprofits as well. So there could be consideration for what a private event use of a public space returns to the community in the form of contributions to the community in nonprofits or other positive contributions. Ideally, what it is, it really boils down to a balance of usage and regulation. I think that there's not a lot of conflict in the parks, and people seem to get along. And I use our trails in parks frequently. I think it's one of the best features of Aspen. That whole area below where you are now, the Rio Grande Park, the John Denver Sanctuary, all of the trails that connect there. Newberry Park, I think, has barbecue grills. I think Heron Park has some barbecue grills. There are some places, I believe, that do support that usage. I support connection to nature for mental well-being. I think that we have to find a way to be able to support those types of events. And we've all received a lot of emails in the last couple of days about use of the parks for yoga, where they were previously allowed, but now they have to get a permit. I'm not sure what the full extent of that is, but part of it for me is if that's a minimal impact, so I question if it's a contribution-based yoga event, or if it's a for-fee event that is on a public-sponsored and public-paid-for park, has a little bit different slant and nuance to me. Mass and scale with impacts is really important. That's all part of the balance. Is we have some of those big events like snow polo and food and wine, and also the Rugger Fest and volleyball that take over public places. How many of those can we tolerate in a year? And I'm definitely against public subsidy for commercial events. Those are my bullet points.
Thanks, Ward. Ward brings up two interesting points there that I'm hoping that we will have a moment to talk about, specifically yoga in our parks, but also how that relates to what he said about that communion with nature and enjoying the outdoors in a setting like that. So I do want to at some point come to that specifically and talk to that specifically, but I want to make sure we get the information that you guys need to leave this meeting saying, good, we heard what we needed to hear. You outlined for us guidance from council on 3 key policy questions.
Yep. So we're in the midst of question 2, and all your comments were awesome. They're really good direction for us, and I think the tenets and the concerns that you brought up are exactly the reason why we need this framework. That is what we as staff will take back and generate our framework for what's allowed in each park. Let me just plow through this really quick because I want to speed up the conversation. Size is also an important consideration and a factor, and this has a relationship with frequency and type, and size of events affects neighbors. How many semi-trucks load in? How many Butler rental vans come in? So again, we want to include this as a key factor within our reference matrix. And again, I want to use Coke Park as an example. And this is why size is important to how we define a permit, because a special event might have an occupancy limit of 1,000 for the finish of the Golden Leaf, but a park use, the smaller scale, we're not going to want 1,000-person regular reoccurring event. So we think there's 2 differences in scale. And not every park is going to have a park special event categorization. This is only in a select number. And I want to build on this with frequency, because this really brings it all together. So within our framework, we're proposing that there's frequency. And in Coke Park, for example, we might have no more than 2 events per month. These are big events. But we could have 3 special uses a week in that park. You could have,
Says a day
or per
here.
day. So you could have, 3 different day camps. We have Wildwood dropping off every day there. We've got other camps that happen there. Could you host 3? These are just examples. These aren't what we're proposing. But I just want to highlight that the smaller size events can have greater frequency. And this is really tying into yoga and fitness and personal trainers, where you can have a small use on a park, multiple user groups, multiple permits on one park at any given time or per week. But cumulatively, you don't want to have a large corporate event or a large wedding more than once a summer, or maybe once every month in certain parks. And so size, frequency, and type are the 3 main variables that we'd like to get your buy-in on and say, yeah, continue moving with your matrix and bring these in together and analyze each park space. So that is the summary of section or question 2.
And the reality is it's just helping us create a resource to track and to kind of take in those requests and build our summer schedule. Before this moment, we were kind of struggling with that.
So I think this is a question. I got a lot of emails today from people in the yoga community, very concerned about losing their ability to do yoga in the parks. But I think I may see a fairly simple solution is if they keep their groups under 25 and they don't schedule the same park every day, they can just choose a different park to meet at. Problem solved. Would that work as a strategy?
Can we move to the commercial discussion? Because I think there's more to this.
Okay.
And the reason I think we should bring this element into that specific point is yoga is a perfectly good example of something we really like in concept. It's connection to the park. It's relatively low footprint, almost no footprint. But when you start increasing frequency, or when you're collecting money from using the public space, those are the gray areas that we're at. And where you draw the line is really the challenge. And so staff have taken a fairly conservative approach to allowing those uses because there are probably 10 yoga studios in Aspen. I don't know how many there are. There's certainly more than one. And Pepke Park or Coke Park or Wagner might be their preferred destination for each of those. So how do we maintain equity in allowing a specific studio to operate in a specific park? That's one of the questions we have. And then you can make parallels with yoga, with fitness classes, with private commercial day camps operating regularly. What else? We've received questions about doing for-profit nature walks in our parks. There's all kinds of endless amount of for-profit ventures that are looking to use the public space. So how do we say yes to one and no to the other? And I'm not suggesting that's the right approach, but this is where the commercial use in parks comes into play. So to your point, yeah, they could be under 25, but we would see that as a regular reoccurring use and probably look to work with them towards a permit, because the other part we really need to manage is how many times is an entity in a park and are they impacting the general community's use? Yeah. Yoga or fitness classes are relatively low impact, but cumulatively, if they happen in the same park every morning at 5 a.m. or 6 a.m., neighbors reach out to us.
Yeah.
So that's the kind of the last part here. And I just wanted to pull up this last slide and give you a sense of where we're heading in community engagement. We think we're probably looking at a consult, but I just wanted to have this as a resource if we want to get to it.
Can you explain this slide? Why do you have it? Nope, the last one.
Yep.
This one?
The boxes, the boxes.
It's all blue and.
That.
This? There's no rhyme or reason to the colors. I just used it as something other than bullet points. So.
Great. It kind of made it look like the yoga and the catered picnics.
Right. They're the building block of it, and personal trainers.
All on the backs of yoga.
Okay, good.
Okay, so we are here to the kind of one of our last topics here. We received a bunch of emails from certain yoga participants as well as producers. They were spurred on by a council member who suggested that they write us emails because we were having this work session. So let's tackle this. I have a question before we go forward, though. I mean, we're not the only city with parks. So have we looked at and have we learned anything from other communities that have parks programming such as this? And the reason I say that is because we are experts in almost everything, right? but it's hard in a presentation like this to know what we don't know. And so when you have questions about how, should we do this, should we do, I don't know how it's done other places. I don't know what's been tried and failed. I don't know so many different things. And I just say that as a preface to the conversation we're about to have.
Yeah.
So, okay. From here, now you can go, because since this has no rhyme or reason, we don't need to look at this anymore. Let's go to this next one. For me, community survey, consult, I don't feel like we need that as a body. I don't think we need to go there. But we do need a discussion about this. So, John was just talking about a way of kind of around the issue, if you will, 25 people or less, moving from park to park, that kind of thing. The specific, and I had the opportunity to speak with Jane, who runs Shakti, today. And so they were doing an every Sunday. It is a pay format. It's in Pepke. And it's one of those things that is really great. Right? It gets people out doing yoga. They're in a park. They're outdoors. It's community connectedness. It's all that. The one rub is it's a pay to play. For example, if that was a city-sponsored program, it would be open to anybody. It would be park usage that continues with no encumbrances on the people to participate by paying money. And at the same time, like, I love the fact that it exists. I think that's fantastic. When I spoke to her today, as a matter of fact, she said, we were talking about parks, different parks or whatever, and she said, you know, we actually like it being in Pepke. Even though there's cars going by, the visibility and what it says about our community doing yoga together to them is like, they're like, we like that over the fact that we'd rather not be next to Highway 82. Anyway. I say all that, just disclosure, I did speak with her today. I do love what that is for our community. I also noticed that there are other places that are doing something similar. For example, at the top of the gondola, they do outdoor yoga. Now that costs you a $35 lift ticket plus a $20 fee for the yoga. In Snowmass, they do outdoor yoga with Aaron King, and that might be actually paid for by Snowmass Village, is what I want to say. I'm not quite sure. Anyway, I bring all that up as this conversation goes forward. I think that it's even stickier than just saying, hey, commercial use or not commercial use, because there's kind of community beneficial commercial use, and then there's just commercial use. So, with that being said, input?
Yeah, I mean,
questions, comments?
Yeah, and just because, you mentioned it, just so no one has like their own story, members of the yoga community reached out to me months ago about the kind of permitting thing and that they weren't getting permits or whatever. And at the time I said, I don't really know anything about it, but would you like me to look into it? And they said, no, like we're cool. So when I saw this come up on through Dropbox, I just called Jane and said, hey, if this is still a thing for you, this would be the time to sort of bring it forward. And I think, when I read the packet, I had that initial inclination of, it can be very easy to just say all commercial bad, but I actually think it's more complicated than that. And so I just reached out and said, hey, if you want to help us understand how this is of community benefit, this would be a time to do it. And certainly didn't like make any pre-decisions about what I do or don't support, as will be obvious by my comments now. But just so you guys understand where I was coming from, and I do that all the time because I think everyone should bring their voice forward. These are the exact right questions to be asking, and I really appreciate you bringing them forward to us. I think I'll have more questions back to you than answers. This is complicated. It's fluid. It's changing quickly. For reasons we don't want and reasons that aren't necessarily bad. And so I agree that beginning to think about a new framework that provides some degree of objectivity, if not just defensibility, is important, and to be intentionally thinking about it is important. But I think it's probably too early to come to hard conclusions at this point. So, you know, I would caution us against being too rigid too soon. And, you know, the business one's a great example. There are, I mean, when I looked at your initial 2 buckets, I thought, man, there's about 40 buckets in between those two. And I realize you got to put them into buckets in some way, or it's just a total mess to handle. But is that the appropriate mix? I don't know at this point. You know, the idea of privatizing a public park for a high dollar event or giving a city subsidy in land to a $50,000 wedding, like, that's definitely not what I have in mind when I think of a public park. But, you know, for people who no longer can afford to get married anywhere in Aspen, and maybe their family's been here for 3 generations and they want to spend an afternoon at a gazebo, you're like, yeah, I could see that, but certainly not every day. So it seems to me that there is a spectrum, and it's going to take some time and creativity to work through that. The commercial side's a much bigger question. I don't think our parks were initially intended for commercial use. I don't think that's how we got there. I don't think, for me, that's certainly not what they are about. There's also a recognition that the commercial landscape is shifting, and there are many things that are inherently commercial that are vital to the fabric of the community. I mean, the loss of that, we think of like the loss of the bar menu, right, in town, and the place where we can actually get together and feel like we have a place in town. The disappearance of that is really detrimental to the social fabric. And the question is, like, where does that go? Some kind of public land is, unless we want to just get rid of those things, whether it's yoga or affordable food, some kind of public land is the only place that's going to be. And it's an open question of, is that an armory? Is that a city street and a pedestrian mall expansion? Is it a park? You know, Rachel said, like, maybe we have one park that's sort of for these things. Again, these aren't things I have answers for, but they are things I think that we really need to be considering. You know, the example that comes to mind, I always think about hawker centers in Singapore, which is like amazing food courts, basically, glorified food courts. But the history is street food is really, really popular in Asia. And then Singapore kind of grows up into this modern metropolis, but it still has the food that it really wants and loves. It's affordable on the streets, but now it has all these externalities and impacts of that being in public space. And so the response was, okay, well, let's keep the good and get rid of the bad and move these into consolidated public spaces where we can have control over, you know, safety and sort of that thing and do that. And maybe that's what happens to our parks in some limited degree. Maybe it's not. But, you know, I think we just need to be mindful of that there are going to be good, or I guess desirable, beneficial commercial uses and non-desirable, non-beneficial commercial uses. And I don't think it's going to be clearly delineated by the exact number of people or the exact frequency. But I do think it's appropriate to start saying, hey, we're working towards finding a new balance and a new norm in a fluid environment. And for this period of 1 or 2 years, this is where we have to draw the line, because we just have to draw the line. But we're doing so in a way where we're getting regular feedback from community members, from the business owners, from the people who are seeking solace and saying, is this working? How do we need to keep adjusting over time? So I'm with Ward. You know, let's not overregulate. Let's be mindful of the big picture, right? When we think about fee structures, for instance, let's not only think of it from the city perspective of, are we getting back our dollar or whatever, but also from, you know, the person who's going in there, if they are meeting a community need, this mind, body, spirit, those 4 bullets you had, how will the fee structure we choose make it possible or impossible for them to operate the thing that we say we want, right? Mental health and well-being is a focus. I think that's got to be a top bullet somewhere in there. Events, whether they are small, large, community, otherwise, that support the mental health and connectivity of our community, I think should get some additional priority or benefit. And then, as was said, you know, that sort of, what was the word? It was an S word, but, you know, the sanctity of the open space and the non-overuse, solitude. That's the one. Also really important, and I recognize that conflicts with many of the other things I said, but it's also really important to maintain that in some degree. So it's more questions than answers. I think we're at the beginning of this conversation and not the end. And while I don't want to invest in a $50,000 outreach program where the community tells us this thing, I do think it's really important to be gathering regular community feedback about what is and isn't working and bringing that forward in a way that we can metabolize that over time, because this is going to be a complicated and I think longer conversation.
With any luck, not. So he had a couple of points in there that are part of the questions that you guys are going to be mulling over. You're going to be coming back, or you're going to be formulating your policy direction and stuff. Very helpful. Okay, great. Rachel.
Yeah, thank you, and I appreciate what you're saying there as well, Skippy. You know, I was thinking that as we look at the commercial uses, we should start to perhaps categorize them, and I was using the term beneficial versus maybe we say neutral. Don't have to say detrimental, but there might be some. But, you know, under beneficial, I would think of things that are community serving, that the local community will choose to participate in. That they perhaps are health, athletic, or educationally centered or monitored, or that they're providing, again, a community service such as childcare, day camp for that age in between when you can let them free roam. So I see that as being how I would start to separate these at. It's similar to what you're saying. And then you can start to say, well, where and when is the appropriate times for them? You know, but I do think there is clearly a difference that you could say this is single use. This is a one-time, we're going to have a one-time yoga gathering of 400 people at Peckney Park, and all the ashrams are invited to come in. You know, just do it like that. That's a single use. But if it is reoccurring, then it really has to be thought of in terms of the appropriate location for that. And, you know, I wouldn't want to be living next to someone ordering people to do Jane Fonda workouts at 6 a.m. next to my windows, you know, but at the same time, things that support health, people's athletic abilities going forward or training or whatever, they assist in the village raising the child as child care is, and that they perhaps are educational, as in the type of nature walk or something pointing out, hey, that's a thistle, we should pull it up right now, that sort of thing. I think those are beneficial. Those add to the cultural context and the fabric of Aspen. Other things want to just land on the fabric of Aspen, and that's the difference. Mm-hmm. And that's where I would separate them out.
It's well said. Well articulated.
Thank you.
As you have this back up, it's just kind of processing my own thoughts out loud. But you know, I think this maybe is the place for the bullet about events that focus on mental health and connection, and that in the guiding philosophy document is maybe where you talk about that mind, body, spirit support.
Well, on these set of bullet points, I don't know that we really need to add it here, but when we first looked at them, I had written down that don't create exclusive use or prohibit others from parks. I mean, this is that do not prohibit multiple use of the parks, you know, in general. I know there are some exclusive uses, so, but in general, when you're evaluating these multiple smaller uses, I don't see the exclusivity, but I could be wrong.
Well, you're hearing a lot on this topic. I think it's shared kind of, you know, Ward started the conversation off with a couple of his suggestions. You've heard it kind of echoed. Ultimately, we as a council are not opposed to the commercial entity, but there's parameters and there's prioritization, I think, that I'm hearing here as well. So, Ward, another comment?
Yeah, thank you. Just to circle back on regulations, over-regulating what's appropriate for regulations, and if policies govern the uses, I don't want a governmental determination of what are, quote, essential uses or acceptable inappropriate use. So to have the freedom of of the staff to have determinations on those uses. But yeah, again, the fees should not be the determining factor or barrier, but as John said earlier, that our fees should at the minimum be break even, and Matt, I think, mentioned size and frequency. I think the size and frequency should be gauged by or judged by the impacts it has on the park, and for Matt and Austin and staff to decide if something is being overused and have the flexibility to limit the usage when the frequency and the type are putting an unacceptable impact on the parks. Thank you.
Thanks, Ward.
All right, well, I appreciate all the feedback. It's been really insightful. And the reason I jump back to this slide is because as Rachel and Skippy especially were bringing up things and questions and what do we do about this or that use, to me, I was using that as a bit of a check. Does this set of guiding philosophy points work? Does that help staff answer the question? And to many extents it did, especially around commercial. Is it bolstering the community? Is it making the community better? Is it open to the community? Those are things that I think we would look to answer within the guiding philosophy and then use those, as Ward was just suggesting, for us to adapt and ensure that we have the right balance as things are flexible, as the situation is fluid. So really good. I think
For me, vitality is just a strange word. I'm happy leaving it there, but it's about boostering community vitality, health. It's because you're talking community and then we're talking individuals. So vitality just doesn't do much to me. It makes it sound like we got a new resort attraction, and I can leave it there. But it seems like it should be, when we talk mental health, when we talk about connectivity, when we talk about these things, they're more than just vitality.
Yeah, I think you understand our point. Community engagement, community connectedness, or community activity, whatever. But yeah, vitality has just been a word that's traditionally used in different types of discussions than this.
good. Our next steps are, I do think we need to connect with some of the yoga studios, because some of the questions I have around that are equity. How do we ensure that each studio has equitable access to Pepke Park? And so I'm going to put that question on them and see what their response is. I think we have some other things we need to check in with, especially around commercial special event producers. I'd like to check in with them, because I suspect when we get down to changes to the municipal code, if they haven't been engaged yet, we need to have a check-in with them. So there is some community engagement that we need to do. I do think we'll have a follow-up work session, hopefully this fall. I heard a lot of comment around fees and how we relate fees to this policy. We'll bring you back that. And then at some point, hopefully before the end of the year, we'll bring back some municipal code ordinance for second reading and update our fees accordingly.
Just one more, thanks. I heard the mayor say he didn't want a community survey that we had planned on doing. Does other folks, is there consensus on that?
I guess there's a difference between a survey and consultation and outreach. A survey sounds, something that we always hear, well, there wasn't the answer there that I wanted to give. You slanted the questions and, this kind of thing, as opposed to saying, yeah, community consultation and outreach about this is really important. And I do agree. I mean, we don't want to operate in a vacuum of any sort. I think more likely than not, the results will hold when the public has been fully engaged. I'm not sure that a survey is necessarily the way to get that engagement in this level. I think it's really going out and talking to some parks users while they're there, talking to some of the neighbors of parks, and, you know, from the memo, I saw that it wasn't like yours going to be done in-house. There's not a dollar request and over time. And so nothing urgent, or there's a 3-week period to comment, please do this, you know. So, yeah, I'm okay with consultation to the community and outreach, but I don't see it as a survey.
As I recall, Tori's comments were, we don't need to have a big survey or use of funds as it related to commercial use. I think that all of us agree that we don't want to increase commercial use of our parks. If I don't mean to be putting words in your mouth, Tori, but that's the way I heard what you said.
No, I was more along the lines of what Skippy said about paying tens of thousands of dollars for an outside consultant to create some survey and that type. So I am all for supporting staff reaching out, getting their information, talking to the people in the community that they need to talk to. And then on your other comment there, no, I don't think that what we heard was no commercial use. That would not be the correct characterization of the conversation. We are open to hearing about what is considered commercial use, but we have questions about those parameters and the equity there.
I wasn't advocating no commercial uses, and I agree that we don't need to spend large amounts to go out and get a outside consultant to query.
Thanks, Ward. Dan, does that answer you? Okay, great. I have a question before we're done. We're only halfway through summer. Some of that great park usage that was going on during the pandemic is not going on these days. Is there any opportunity for us to get some of these things that we just talked about here, especially when it comes to mental health, well-being, and the yoga in the park, and you know, and there's as always, there's different ways to skin the cat. So I don't know how we get there, but I don't participate, and it's meant something even to me to see my community members getting together in our parks. I've seen the benefit. And so I'm wondering, we do have a couple months left, and if there was the opportunity to entertain permitting or something like that, maybe we could have something happening even this summer.
60-day grace period.
I don't know. And I don't want to put that on you. I'm not demanding. I'm just saying, hey, there's no better time than the present for some things, and things like this can fall into that category. So I know that there is some support up here we heard from a couple different council members, when it comes to mental health, well-being, and that kind of communion, and not vitality, but some other word in there. So anyway, if there's the opportunity for that even this summer, I think that would be a benefit to our community.
I appreciate that. I mean, no time like the present for mental health and connection.
Community strengthening?
He's still working on words. We'll get the thesaurus out in a little bit, and we'll figure it out together. Do you have any other questions, comments, suggestions for us this evening?
No, I think you've given us a lot of great feedback, and as I think's been said, this is the start of a longer journey, and it's something that I think we're really proud that we're taking this on internally as a staff, because your point about what other communities do, it is different. It's, Central Park is the size of all of City of Aspen.
Yeah, or more.
And so how Central Park manages special events,
not referring to
I know,
Central
but I'm
Park,
just
New
using
York.
that as an extreme example, is vastly different than how we manage our 32 little parks.
Yeah.
And so that's why we are really excited to be doing this as a team internally and really engaging with you all. So thank you.
You guys have been doing a great job. So
It shows in the comments.
you're not going to screw this up, right? Like, you're doing a great job. Your focus is in the right place. We even had, over the last 2 years, we've had things that have had to come to council because you had to check in and say, we're just not sure. So you're erring on the right side, and you've done a great job. And so I don't have any fear here. what was it, a couple years ago with snow polo, we got a lot of public comment about kind of parks usage. And I think you guys have done a great job responding to that and really navigating those waters over the last couple of years really well. So I don't feel like anything that's going to come out of this is going to be like, oh man, it's okay. Nancy and I had an opportunity to talk recently, and we talked about the art exhibit that was in Pepke Park last weekend. For those of you that remember the history of this, it was in Wagner Park. And whether it was the art community, the art galleries, even the public was like, why is this in Wagner Park? We moved to the street, and people were like, yeah, this is kind of cool. I like this street fair thing that you got going on. Then we moved it over to Pepke, and people were like, you know what? That's a decent home for this. I've had so many fewer comments about it since it. So again, I think you guys are doing a great job. I think you're on the right track. I think you know what the community is looking for. And so I don't have any real great fears that we're going to take any steps backwards, just steps forward.
Have fun with this Rubik's Cube.
Thanks for your hard work.
We can take 5 minutes, and then we're just going to have a brief conversation. We're going to limit this next conversation to about 30 minutes at most. 36 minutes?
Oh, 6 minutes.
Yeah.
All right, thank you. Thank you to anybody that's out there that's still sticking with us. Our last item on our agenda is safety and mobility in the downtown core. It's a discussion about Living Lab, what we've seen go on over on Galena and Cooper. This item came up last week at our council meeting, and this is just an opportunity for us to weigh in, talk about the current status, get any information from observations that we can, and then just talk about where we go from here. I'll let you guys do most of the talking, but it's August 1st. Original intention for what I think is there now. I think, is it complete? All installations are complete as of today?
We have 2 signs to hang that we just got, but
Okay.
it's complete in terms
So,
of.
so just for public information and for council members, so over this past 4 days, I think on Friday it started of installing, what do you call them, curblets?
They're called zippers, but it's a
Zippers.
rubber curb.
Yeah, so little, I don't know if you guys have been, okay, so if you've seen them, there's little curbs that are delineating basically the safety zone between the bike lane and the parking lane. So so we're at completion now, August 1st. So we're talking about 2 full months, October 1 or whatever is supposed to come down, something like that. So anyway, with that, do you want to just share with us any information or observations, any information that you'd like or whatever?
Yeah, I'll kick it off, and we're going to be light on presentation, and we want to hear your conversation. But at the July 26th meeting, what I heard that council wants to discuss is revisions to the Cooper and Galena Living Lab, lowering the speed limit for all streets in the core, and I think that you had to discuss going to 10 miles an hour, repealing the city's stop sign as yield law, or at least dealing with it. And then number 4, what does the lab area look like when the lab is taken down? So we'll just jump right into the revisions, and you go ahead. We have, obviously we only have a couple months of data, but we thought we'd share with you what we have. The parking department's philosophy is, and I think they've shared this with council over the years, is to maintain 85% occupancy in parking spaces. So there's always at least 15% available to cut down on the churn of people driving around town looking for parking spaces. This is a graph of this year to date, and so far we've met that goal. We have stayed below the 85% threshold. And I think you have a graph that shows a couple of years worth of information. So that's 2019, 2021, and 2022 to date. The blue line, I think, is this year to date. So, just some data points. We don't need to stay there. And I'm going to let PJ talk about the negative interactions. So they did try to get a baseline of negative interactions in the area before the lab. So take it away, PJ.
So we've been out 2 hours every single day, 5 or 6 days a week. We've observed some Saturdays during the market. And what we're seeing during our 2-hour window that we're out observing is a reduction in negative interactions. And a negative interaction is classified as a near miss. It's any time a user has to do a sudden or immediate rapid change in their behavior. So it could be slamming on the brakes, it could be a biker swerving out of the way of a vehicle, it can be a pedestrian halting in a crosswalk. So we've been observing those and tallying those, and this is the trend that we've started to see, which is a significant decrease. Also, what we started to notice with the lab as it was installed, we started to see a little bit more consistent numbers. You'll see towards the right that we were seeing a much smaller number of increases, and then it also evened out a little bit.
Okay. So we thought we'd put up a picture of the depiction, or the, I guess, depiction of the lab when we presented this to you in February 15th. So the lab installation is complete. This is what basically what it looks like. Diagonal parking on both sides of the road were changed to parallel parking. A contraflow bike lane was added, as you see on the left here. And then the remainder of the roadway is reserved for cars and bikes. We also have a plan view of the area, if it helps you have your discussion about how things are working or not working. But that's really all we had on this. We'll let you have your conversation.
Thanks. During the planning of this, when it came to council members had a couple of different questions. Specifically, I remember Ward asking questions about the one-way on Hyman Avenue and why that was necessary. Response was because of the counterflow bike lane, to have a left turn there was going against the bike lane traffic, and so it was a smarter decision to go one way. Rachel brought up bigger partitions. I think, I forget how you phrased it, but you were interested in either the planter boxes or barriers, something to keep the bikers safe. I think at that time was kind of the suggestion or the origination of it. So, having gone through that, we approved going forward with this living lab. And to me, living lab really meant that we were going to be able to look at it and see what we liked and see what we didn't like and maybe make changes. So I really just wanted us to get back together, having seen this now for a month, and talk about what we see going forward. At our last meeting on Tuesday of last week, Rachel asked a great question, which was like, well, when we're done with this, what is the plan? So even that I thought was something that was great for us to answer in this setting. Truthfully, October 1, the main thing is that going into winter months, those curb barriers will come out because of snow plowing, number one. Number two, the bike lane, a counterflow bike lane in the wintertime may not be the best utilization of that space because biking is minimized during the winter time. So I wanted us to get out, that message that yes, this is not a permanent install. It does have a lifetime, a life term. And where we go from here will be up to a little bit of council direction about what we've seen. I have my own opinions about what is going on here. I've circulated with you guys some information.
Just a clarifying question, because I don't know. So in terms of what... Just a clarifying question, because I'm not sure. So Tori, what you're saying is that there are certain elements of this that we know go away, but the rest of it is TBD. Is that accurate, or?
Yeah, pretty much.
Okay, I just want to understand.
Well,
Yeah.
So this might.
I think the original plan was that it would go back to what it was before the lab,
Okay, that's what I thought.
Started.
That's why I was,
and that's,
that's what I initially thought. So
Right.
is it that or is it not that?
It's up
it is
to,
that, but our council could discuss
Sure.
something different, and
Okay.
that's what I raised at the last meeting.
This
But
is-
without any sort of change, change on our end, the expectation is October 2nd, it starts to transition back to how it was.
This slide is our recommendation for a starting point.
I like the idea of keeping the changes we like.
Okay.
So, and the reason I say that, Skippy, is because, this is a lab, this is where we're trying to learn about what's going on there. One thing that I am not interested in returning to is the double angle parking. I think that if I've learned anything from this lab is that just having the parallel parking on the right side of the road is an improvement. It's an improvement for pedestrian and traffic and bicyclist safety. It's an improvement in feel. to our downtown and such. So I definitely want to have a conversation about not returning to the pre-existing condition, because I don't think the pre-existing condition was great.
When you say right side, which side do you mean?
So if you're traveling down the road, it'd be the side that's on your right.
But I could.
It's a one-way street.
On the current road.
Yeah.
Got it. Okay. I was like,
You know, and I remember this conversation started 3 years ago, and one of the comments was Rachel made about that double angle parking and just eliminating one side of angle parking because of what it did for sight lines, as much as anything. But I really felt like that was a main cause of the kind of the safety issues that we see down there. You know, another thing that I've observed that's come out of this is ultimately it's about pedestrians. And what I've seen is a greater desire for perhaps wider sidewalks. We have all been entertaining, and there's been a conversation for years going on about extending the pedestrian malls. And so that's the experience that I've had, is that when I go out there, what I see is I see people walking in the bike lane. I see people really enjoying that greater pedestrian safety and openness for pedestrians. So I think there's long-term goals that we all might be looking at and think places we want to get to, but how to get there and realistically. Extending a sidewalk out there is a major undertaking. My expectations is that it would be a regrading of the road that it would take, because right now the crown of the road is well above the sidewalk level. So if you can't just build anyway, my point being is, like, I've heard different takes from different people and council members about like where we maybe want to go in the future, but getting there is kind of a step-by-step process. So again, I feel like what I've seen, and I'll just share, you know, my observations. What I've seen out there is that, and compliments to our staff, what they were able to implement and put out there is not only what they told us about and what we agreed to, but they've done about as good a job as trying to balance all these interests that can be done. For me, I just feel like the counterflow bike lane, and I said this at our meeting last week, we're not dealing with pedal power. We're dealing with people riding varying degrees of bicycles with motors on them. So for me, I don't think that the counterflow bike lane is something that I want to support going forward, but it's going away for this winter anyway. So I want to come up with something that we want to move to, and if this council wanted to, start implementing it before this October 1 date and deadline. I've heard from different council members about how they feel about it, and whether there's support for that or not, we can figure out. I just thought that it was our responsibility in a living lab to come and have this conversation so that the community knows what we're thinking and what we've seen. So I'll start with that, Rachel, and then Ward for comments. And truly, we're going to be out of here in 20 minutes or whatever. We just want to check in. How is everybody feeling about what we're doing and where we're at?
Thank you, Tori. I'm going to start for a second with an email I got from Hunter Creek Property Management this morning that said, will everyone please start practicing some real bike safety? And please remember, you cannot ride your bikes on the sidewalks and into the courtyards of the Hunter Creek buildings, because people are almost getting hit, and that's happening with people with the carriages behind the bike, and you're supposed to dismount before you walk your bikes into the buildings. I was surprised to see that our management company is finding enough complaints and enough bad behavior and dangerous behavior in Hunter Creek to say people just riding their bikes, rushing through, almost knocking over the little children who are playing in the courtyard because they just, you know, don't dismount. So I found that really interesting to have gotten that this morning. I think the Living Lab has been and continues to be a great success, because it gives us some real information to look at. and it gives us a real chance to evaluate any number of perhaps suppositions we've all had. And we've gotten a lot of letters about it and things like that. I think there's still more information that we will need in the future. One of the things that we're not talking about here, because we're talking about safety, is the concerns about parking and lack of parking. But that is very interconnected to how many all-day free parking passes are out there and have been distributed in the past. And we need a lot more information on that so we can really gauge, quote, the lost parking issue or not. I appreciate the concept of lower speed limits within the core, and I appreciate the presentation you guys have given. I think that people tend to get a really small viewpoint sometimes, and they don't look at, oh, there's 15% turnover in the whole mall, but not on Galena where I wanted to park. You know, it's like, it's probably 100% on Galena and 80% turnover on Hopkins and some of the side streets. And those are, you know, that, so again, you can't satisfy everyone, but that statistic won't mean a lot to a lot of people who only want to park on Galena and Cooper. I think this Living Lab has helped us learn a lot about the conflicts and potential conflicts between user groups. And that's something that has become, you know, really apparent to me, with pedestrians saying, I was almost run over by a bike, or, you know, I don't understand bike behavior. They're going in circles now. You know, it's just very hard to gauge sometimes whether you're a walker or you're a rider in a car. And, you know, this is an awkward thing to say, but I think it points out a real demographic difference between some of our age groups in our community. And I think younger people can be crazy great on their pedal power, and there's some older people who are too, but there's older people who are not bike friendly or like to bike a lot, and they can be scared by bikes that, as I said at the other meeting, don't have lights on at night where they should on the roadway, or bother to ring a bell when they're going to pass you, and that has created a real pedestrian bike conflict in a way that we haven't had before. We used to worry about pedestrian car conflicts or bike car conflicts, but now we have pedestrian car conflicts. And, you know, it seems in some ways to tie to the demographics we saw during the COVID pandemic of some demographic groups not caring about the public health orders, or continuing to have parties or much higher incident rates going forward than older generations who were more concerned about their safety. And so that's something that has become pretty apparent to me. It's a conflict between user groups and perhaps even demographic groups. And we need to balance the town and the core for everyone. And so that's the real challenge. I would like to say I think the bulb outs over by City Market have been tremendously successful. Still, some people will cross mid-street, but most people are crossing there, and it's a much safer crossing. And so seeing the outline of the bulb outs next to the brew company and the old City Hall, I think is appropriate. I think that that's the type of thing you learn from doing a living lab and looking at the safety that you're giving people, that you only have to cross, you know, was it 15 or 16 feet of traffic lanes versus 25, and it's much safer. So I really appreciate that. There are bigger issues, as you say, Tori, and things that we may want to or need to at some level to work towards. And I know that there are some great plazas and pedestrian spaces throughout the world where bikes are banned. And, you know, it's, I guess, ride to the plaza, here's a great parking space, and please walk through these walking areas. And I'm not saying that that should be where we go, but if we really want to encourage the pedestrianization of the mall, and especially with vehicles that have a throttle on them, that's something we really need to consider. And if we're doing that, we would need to consider, where do you create the parking places for people to bring their bike and leave it and go do their Saturday morning shopping or whatever, and then come back and pick up their bike. So those are the types of things, and lower speed limits, I think, are really probably appropriate in the mall. The core area, if we defined it. The other thing about the Living Lab has really shown what we're getting back to with the view of Aspen Mountain. That has always been Galena and down the mall. And that had just been totally ruined in my mind by angle parking on both sides and the big Super Duty double-sized trucks and Explorers and Tundras. You know, you barely even had one traffic lane, even though it was a 2-lane road back then. So I do support keeping a 1 lane. I think that's the only way to really open up more space for pedestrians or bikes or wider sidewalks if they should happen in the future. And that's kind of where I'm looking at it, you know, and it's just a return, you know, potential return for this winter of maybe angle on one side and parallel on the other, but maintain the one-way. And you know, we'll have to think about how many of those angle spaces so that they're not really close to crosswalks and things like that. But I do like the road being a one-way direction. I do like the greater views that have been opened up. I do think it has pointed out how we can make the crosswalks safer through greater bulb outs and those sort of spaces. And those spaces actually leave a little room for new planters or other type of facilities we might need, whether it's recycling bins or things like that to be really collected, or even, you know, information kiosks on those corners. So those are the things I generally think about right now. The other potential smaller changes, like moving the bike station now, I'm or moving it to a different location. I'm neutral on that one way or the other. So that's pretty much, as again, I'd like to see more continued information, but I've been getting good feedback from it, and it just does, it feels a little more like an entryway to the pedestrian malls than when it was just super parked out. Thank you.
Thanks, Rachel. Ward?
Yeah, thank you. I'll try to keep my comments brief. One good thing about following Rachel is she normally gets everything on my list. For those of you at council that are not joining by Zoom, which I never am when I am there, but I particularly like Pete Rice's stuffed dog behind him.
That's the best. Really good.
It reminds me of Hotel New Hampshire.
Oh, they were real.
It does take time for people's behavior to change and for people to accept. I want to stay the course with what we've started. I think we had a rocky start. Part of it was communications, and part of it was supply chain. We couldn't get going as smoothly as we wanted to. As Rachel mentioned, that any permanent changes that are going to be made in the area that we are using as a living lab, we went through last year at Spring and Cooper, and it came to council about making those changes permanent and to budgeting for those permanent changes. So if we're doing lessons learned, I really encourage people to be patient and to try the changes, try them on. When the malls were put in, there was huge resistance to that, and I think the malls are a signature part of Aspen. I agree with the a goal of decreasing the frequency of cars in the core. I think that we do have pedestrian and bicycle anarchy. It would really be nice if people could follow the rules, even know what the rules are. And if that means more enforcement, I would be for that, but I know that we can't enforce when we don't have fully staffed police departments. So those are considerations. I like the idea of wider sidewalks, Tori. I think in my numerous times that I've been down bicycling, both counter lane and with a lane and walking, that I've seen more pedestrians and bike lanes and pedestrian bicycle interactions than just bicycles. But there is really bicycle anarchy. So I think there's validity to maybe considering banning bicycles, or if people can't behave the rules of the road and do away with the safety concerns, looking at banning. I think we can tweak. I think the Living Lab gives us an opportunity to see where tweaking is needed. Yeah, and I've said this a number of times over the years, the trinity of Aspen is parking, trees, and dogs, and we certainly heard about parking through this. And again, Rachel's comments about how many permanent passes do shop owners, employees, how many parking spots are taken up all day long by shop owners, and customers would have a parking space if employees weren't parked in front of their stores. So I think we need to look more closely at parking permits and usage. Yeah, so in summary, I want to stay the course, learn the lessons, and decide what to do after October 1 rolls around. Thank you.
I had one thing I forgot.
Thanks, Ward. Yeah.
I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I forgot to add to your question. I would like to eliminate the counterflow lane as well. It just feels to me, if it's going to be one way for cars, it should be one way for the bikes. And trying to add that counterflow traffic is on a one-way is very confusing, and it takes a little space away that we're going to have space at a premium for eventual refill or something like that. And that is part of why you can't turn left onto Hyman anymore. But it doesn't make sense to me, and that's where people can get hit walking into it. So that's, if it's one way for cars, and why isn't it one way for bikes? I just have that sense. And then the last thing is, when we did do the wider sidewalks over on Mill Street, it was highly expensive, and it's not just the shape of the road, it's all the underground utilities that have to be moved too. Thank you.
Thank you. John?
I just want to say, darn it, Rachel, you took the one thing. No, that's fine. I would just want to point out a couple things. Number one, the timing of when the lab happened, I think, was a large part of the complaints, because it was right before the 4th of July. I'd also like to state that since the complaints have started rolling in, I ride my bike through there at least once or twice a day. And I got to say, 95% of the time, it's as super smooth sailing. I agree the counterflow bike lane is confusing for most people. I think we have three kinds of bikers in our town: locals that know the rules and follow them, locals that know the rules and don't follow them, and tourists. And the tourists, we can't really expect them to, we can't really expect much.
Learn it that quickly.
Right. But yeah, I've seen a lot of pedestrians standing in the bike lane. And anyway, also, one more thing. Love the bulbed out, I think the bulbed out corner sidewalks. I'd like to see more of those throughout the city, because I think they're hugely successful. And I also agree with when we go back, when the lab is over, I don't want to go back to both sides of parallel parking.
No, angle parking.
I mean, yes, I do not want to go back to both sides of angle parking. Thank you.
Thanks, John. Skippy, any comments?
What all do we want to? There was so much there. I was like trying to take it in. What?
Well, you, at our last meeting, actually, your request was to revisit the goals. You wanted to have this conversation in the context of what our goals are. And so, you know, we were, our goal going into this was kind of a balance. We were really looking for that pedestrian safety was primary and priority. Bike access and the bike lane was kind of the secondary, because we put them in kind of that same non-vehicular, and then calming traffic and not necessarily reducing parking for less automotive, because they're not directly related, but that was a side impact as well. So that was the goals discussion. Right now, we're just trying to check in with you about, what's your experience been out there as we move towards the winter time and changes are going to happen. Where do you sit? We've heard some suggestions, but no timeline for the changes that are coming. Ward very specifically is like, hey, I can hold on for 2 more months. I'm cool with this for now, but lessons learned.
Right.
So we're just trying to get your input and, what is your experience? What have you heard? What do you bring to the table as a representative?
Yeah, I mean, I'm with Ward in that, it's a test, and I want to see the results of the test. The data you showed on parking, super helpful to bring some actual quantitative data to this. And we'll have more of that come October, whether that's pedestrian safety, interactions, parking, traffic calming. I don't know if it's possible, but, we hear about the economic impacts, right? Controlled for non-parking affected areas. That stuff is all stuff that I want to see. We really haven't had this fully in place until now. My observations are, the beginning was pretty chaotic. It's confusing. And that's, that may be the result of the solution that was put forward, or it may simply be the result of any change. We don't know at this point. When I was just in, Europe beginning of the summer, right, there was a conversation about a country that had to switch which side of the road they drove on. That was a day they had to do that, and it didn't go well, but it didn't mean that the change was a bad change. It means the transition was really messy. But again, this may not be the solution. I think this is one where we all sort of know where I am on this, right? Like long term, right? I want to get to a place where private cars are not in the downtown core, where we reallocate that scarce community resource to things that we need more, and we can deliver people on demand, electric, et cetera. We can get people to where they want to go. But how do we get there? It's a complicated question. And so to me, this was an opportunity to test, is this one way there? Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. But I want to see the results of this test. And then, coming out into the winter, I don't know is the answer, because I do want to see that data. I can agree that, going back to sort of, maximum angle parking is not something that feels great. The things that do actually feel good right now, in my experience and hearing from others, is that additional sidewalk space, is those open sight lines. It wasn't the goal to get people walking in the bike lanes, but, people clearly want to have some more room to walk. I've felt that for sure. So that feels like a thing that is working. The thing that feels like it isn't working, and again, maybe it's a snapshot in time and it will start working better, maybe it isn't, is we have 3 different directions, basically. This way, that way, this way. It's confusing. That definitely feels strange to me. The buffer zone that I understand was intended for the car door, and maybe, again, this changes with the curblets. I'm going to go with that because I think that's way more fun. Maybe that changes. Like that was weird. I saw people parked in it. I saw cars left in it. I saw people standing in it. It's just a weird purgatory between uses that I haven't seen elsewhere, and it seems like people are also confused with. Maybe that changes over time. I don't know. So yeah, I'm looking forward to additional information coming through that is hard and grounded, viewed through the prism of our initial goals, and to get there. And to Tori's suggestion about bigger solutions or different solutions, speed limit, et cetera, I think they're all great if they can work. But I am mindful of not creating solutions in name only, solutions we can't enforce, right? So the lowering of, and I don't know how true this is, so please correct me if I'm wrong, but I was having a conversation with a previous decision maker, someone who used to sit here, who said, we lowered the speed limit to 20 miles an hour, and it's great. We said that, we voted on it, and we thought it was a great thing, but it was pretty much one sign at the beginning of town. No one really knew, and it didn't change a whole lot. Again, I don't know if that's the accurate implementation, but stuff that can actually be effective and put into use is important rather than things that are just sort of in name. So I'm open to looking at all that, but I want to make sure it's things that we can really make work if we're going to take some of those other swings at it.
Sounds good. The only other item here was this stop signs as yields. We got our city attorney looked into it. It's a state law.
Yeah.
There are different ways to deal with it and the like. Again, I just bring this up because, Rachel, I think, made a great point about that one way, and bikes should travel with the one way. Bikes have motors on them these days. That's number one. Number two, we've told bikes that you have to get off of our sidewalks. And if you're going to be in the road, having different rules for different users is, for me, just sounds like a recipe for something to go wrong. So the stop signs as yields is one way to say it. The actual legislature is kind of complicated and convoluted, if you will. So the best way, and Jim refers to it like this, he says, it's kind of like stop signs are yields. What does it really mean? You're supposed to be going, if you're on a bike and you're approaching a stop sign, you are supposed to reduce your speed to 10 miles an hour. You are supposed to be aware of any oncoming traffic or situations, that's including pedestrians and crosswalks. If you deem it safe, you may not come to a full stop and proceed into that intersection, whether you're going straight, right, or left. That is the ruling. That is what's up with the ruling. The way that people interpret it is that bikes don't have to stop at stop signs.
Yeah, I would reflect a couple things. First is a total agreement with the problem statement, as observed as both a driver of a car, a motorcycle, and a bicyclist. And, I can also be a biking anarchist sometimes. I can be in the problem, I've been there, I've done it, and it's such a chaotic mix of everything that it is frustrating for all user groups, and we don't always respond. I don't often always respond in the best way as a result of that. You're like, God, I'm going to be stuck here forever, and it's going to go around, right? And it's it's dumb and it's dangerous, but I've done it, I've seen others do it. I agree it's a problem that we need to figure out. How we do that and how we make that enforceable and workable is a different question. Without a motor, I can hit 30 on my bike, right? Just pedaling. Some people are locked into pedals, some people aren't, some people are with kids. It's a mess. So I just agree to that and say I want to work on a solution, and I will commit to being a better part of the solution individually. But there's not a clear, easy answer. And any answer that we would adopt at this table, I want it to be something we can actually put into effect.
Keep that in context, though, Skippy, because
Yeah.
there's a lot of things that we have that are not 100% enforced. So that condition is not going to change no
I
matter
agree, but it can add to the complexity and confusion, bless you, rather than help it if it's not. Even if
I know your point.
You know what I mean?
I get your point, but
how do we?
that's
how do we
a
do
thing that people deal with all the time. I'm going to go to Rachel first, and then John. She was trying to.
I agree it's a problem. I think it's mostly a matter of safety, and we don't want a bicycler getting hurt. We don't want anyone getting hurt. And I don't know if there could be a flyer that you say should be attached to every bike shop with a new rental that explains what a stop on yield really means. But if other cars are already at the three-way, four-way stop, a bicycle does not have right-of-way. There's other people already with right-of-way there, and they need to stop at the stop sign. That's where the difference is, and people just think it's an automatic right-of-way to supersede other individuals, other bikes, other cars, other motorcycles at that same stop sign intersection. That's the problem, and I don't know how to deal with it. I don't know if other towns have done better jobs of it, but is there something that can be attached to the bottom of some of the stop signs that, says bikes must yield right-of-way? Or are there other, that's universal traffic code, so probably not. But anyhow, that's what I was going to say, is it's more the danger that I want to eliminate for all the safety of our public.
One thing you can do is designate intersections where a biker must stop. but you have to put that on the sign.
Yes,
Bikes must stop.
yes.
And that is within the code.
And I'll point out that we have 312 stop signs in the city.
Well, there's only a few where there's
If that was trivia, I would lose the jelly bean counting competition
But what he's
significantly.
also saying is that it doesn't have to be every stop. So like Ward was saying a second ago, in this area, in the downtown core, you know, and Ward was saying, well, maybe it's a situation where maybe people should be dismounting and walking through this Galena and Cooper, you know. So anyway, we could sign just our core stop signs. Look, this is just a work session to have this conversation. We're not going to decide on this today. It will be coming back as we get closer to October, and they will need some council direction about exactly what they're suggesting. For example, the one-way on Hyman will be something that I will want to revisit with this council. And then the parking configuration as we go into winter is something that I think this council should weigh in on. So we will revisit this in the next 2 months, and we can talk about this, lowering the speed limit in the core or whatever it is, or dealing with this stop signs as yields. We'll deal with it another time. This was just for staff to get a kind of flavor of where council is thinking and how we're going about this.
If I can just comment one thing on the lowering the speed limit. If you want staff, if you want the city engineer to implement that, we must do a speed study for all those areas that justifies lowering the speed limit. But Jim will tell you that city council also has the authority by ordinance to lower the speed limit, which is a much quicker way to do it. Just telling you that there's 2 ways to go.
It's a two-way street.
So you might want to think about it. Then the other thing I need to ask a clarifying question. It sounds like 3 of you want to eliminate the contra bike lane. Is that the direction you want to give us? And then what would you like us to use that space for?
I was saying that in the long term, not necessarily tomorrow.
Yeah, that's my first question, is what are you talking about for timeline at the end? At the
Well-
end of the lab, it is scheduled to go away. Are you talking about between now and October 1st?
Well, I thought that's what you were talking about.
I am, but I'm not trying to put my fellow council members in any situation that they don't want to be in. So, yeah, Tori, I do believe that I've seen a month of this. I do believe that the counterflow bike lane, it works, but just not in this location. And so, yes, for me, I'm interested in moving towards that, but it sure ain't tomorrow. You know, is it a month from now? Is it 3 weeks from now? I don't know. I don't know what you guys can actually do. I don't know.
The old supply chain thing, and then hiring people to paint the
You're
stripes.
gonna have to restripe.
We could be a month or 2 out.
So why don't we start with that before we impart any direction on that? Because I agree with you. I did hear 3 of us saying, like, we're not sure if this counterflow bike lane works. Why don't you just maybe come back to us with like, hey, here's your possibilities.
Okay.
I mean, if we can't get this done for a month or so anyway, then we don't need to put the pressure on of failing at that. So
Anybody?
why don't we just continue that conversation?
Fair enough.
Sorry, is there a majority who would like to take it out before the end of the lab? I think that was Scott's first question, and I'm not clear on that. Thanks.
Based on what Scott just imparted, I'm with Tori. I think we only have maximum 2 months left, and with supply chain issues, what they are, who knows if we ask for it to be taken out tonight, it might take a month to take it out anyway. I don't know. I feel like just letting it go for the 2 months. The way I
Yeah, and I am not in that camp. So again, Diane, I was trying not to put forth the question that you just did. So I would
I'll
wait for
chime
more
in here.
information.
What I don't want, though, is for Scott to go away and do a bunch of work. If you're going to let the lab run its course, then he doesn't have to do a lot of additional work to figure out what we can get done when. That's the only reason I'm asking.
Well, then my suggestion would be to make the changes before, yes, I am supportive of making the changes before the October 1 date, or initiating these changes. I would like to, yes, for me, that's my take. Yeah. Ward, go ahead.
Yeah, It seems it would not create as many conflicts over on Hyman and Mill in front of Crystal Palace and Wheeler. I'd like to see this run its course, see what happens. We've only just in the last couple of days put those little dividers in. I'm not supportive of making a mid-course correction. I'd rather it run its course, and even if we did tell Scott to change it, we may not get it done before October 1st anyway. So with respect, Tori, I'm going to disagree with you on this.
Well, at least you're doing it with respect. Thank you.
It's nice.
I'm your wingman.
I appreciate you, Ward. And Ward's made that clear from the beginning. You know, he's interested in remaining this. Like I said, I think this is a living lab. So the changes that we're suggesting here and getting rid of the counterflow bike lane, I think should be part of the living lab. I would do it during the living lab, not at the end. Thus the name Living Lab. If it was a lab, then we would just wait. It's a living lab. So
Lab, it would bark.
anyway, I am in favor. Diane asked the question directly. Yes, my thing is I would love to know what our options are. I would love to see us make changes and try something else out while we're in this lab environment.
I would agree with Tori, but, thank you. I would agree with Tori on this, but it's not something that I'm, going to be upset about if we have to delay for a while. I would be more interested in that if we're able to change that sooner, would we, how would we get the information out, to people accurately and quickly? I mean, and how much of a deconstruction, no parking in the downtown for 3 days in August while they reconfigure it, or things like, the implications of trying to take it out sooner, I think would be worth considering. If the question is what to do with the extra space, I think, I would think about parking the cars back closer to the sidewalk where that was. But that way the main street is wider open for others to use. But I can understand the reluctance of not wanting to do something now, and it's not life and death to me, but I do worry. I see people parking in it, standing in it, talking in it, and then bikers coming around the corner going 30 miles an hour on their little bike. And those conflicts, as I said, the lab has been wonderful in terms of learning about the different user groups, how they use it, and where we need to focus. And the focus in the past has always been car-bike conflicts, car-pedestrian conflicts, and now we're dealing with bicycle conflicts with pedestrians. And we have to deal with that better.
Okay, so again, Skippy wants to stay for 2 more months, I think he said.
Yeah, I mean, just to be clear, I'm with Ward, also with respect. But it's an experiment, and when you change the parameters of an experiment midstream, you convolute the results. So my saying we should stay is not a reflection of I think it's a good solution or that it's necessarily working. It's at the end we want to have clear data on all these other things that we're talking about, and so it's just going to invite more questions then of what was the reason that did or didn't work, and I think it just makes things more complicated.
And so, John, I'm looking to you. If you would like to have Scott find out information about timing with it, then we can find out if it's even possible.
I'll agree with you that the contra bike lane is the only area where I really see conflicts. But I'm also going to point out that, in addition to what's already been said, that we're in August. In 2 weeks, people are going to start to go back to school. We will have a very busy Labor Day, but once September hits, it's going to be much slower downtown, and conflicts will hopefully diminish. So my vote is to stay the course.
All right. And so to both of you, again, I will say this one last time because you've got your position. This is a living lab. So when you're doing an experiment and you do change things, you get to experiment with other things. I still suggest that instead of getting to the end of this, it is a smarter move for us to look at the opportunities for making these changes before the end of it. Because at the end of it, you will then say, okay, we want to go this way or that way. But my suggestion is, if we do this earlier, then you have time to see it again. You can see what we are talking about. And who knows, maybe we implement it and we go, no, you know what? Now that I've seen both of them, so it's an opportunity to learn. I think it's a good idea. I advocate for it. And I understand your position.
I appreciate it. I hear your point. I understand your point. The analogy that comes up for me is like, if you're trying to get in better shape in your dieting, you could try a lot of different diets, but you do need some duration of trying the diet to be able to understand it within the context of everything else going on in your life. And I just don't think it's been long enough yet.
Okay.
Right. Good
Thanks.
meeting. Thank you, guys.
Yeah, thank you guys for coming back to us.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for bringing the topic forward for us, Tori. I
That was a
appreciate it.
tough
Yep.
one.
Yeah, it is.
The award.
Especially because I don't really like the solution.
Thank you to GrassRoots as always. We have another work session scheduled for tomorrow at 4 p.m. Join us then.
Ward, you need to use more sunscreen.
Well, you notice that it's dark over my shoulder, so I'm sending it that you're sending the darkness your way.